Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated to a medieval Pokémon world. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 231, The Champion and the Elite Four. The noise and excitement gradually subsided. Throughout Lucian City, tourists and residents alike were still buzzing with talk of the recently concluded league tournament. Inside the castle, Lucian sat upright on his throne, a calm smile on his face, his gaze directed downward. Before him, 5 newly crowned trainers stood in respectful silence, their hearts caught between excitement and apprehension. They understood, from the moment His Majesty had personally bestowed upon them their titles, they were no longer simply trainers. Elise stepped forward, presenting a golden imperial decree, a warm smile on his face as well. Congratulations! Anna and the others looked on, barely containing their excitement. From this day forward, Anna officially assumes the role of Pokémon League champion, overseeing all Pokémon-related matters within the kingdom. Elise's voice was clear and measured. Lucas, Raphael, Freya, and Derek, you 4 accept the roles of Elite Four members, guarding the 4 corners of the Unova region, maintaining order, supporting the champion, and guiding the relationship between humanity and Pokémon. Yes. Understood. We accept. The 5 of them bowed in unison, their voices clean and resolute. Lucian gave a small nod. His tone, when he spoke, was unhurried, almost casual, as though he were passing along a minor errand. Good. From now on, the operation of the gyms, the organization of competitions, the handling of trainers who violate regulations, and any disputes involving wild Pokémon, all of it is entrusted to you. Derek hesitated, then couldn't stop himself. Your Majesty, and you? Lucian smiled. I have more important matters to attend to. A ripple passed through all 5 of them. Rumors they had only half believed came rushing back to mind, that His Majesty had a passion for researching and inventing, that the electric lights now illuminating the kingdom's streets and the steam trains running its roads had all come from his hands. In an instant, what had felt like the highest honor imaginable suddenly also felt like an enormous weight settling onto their shoulders. But what moved them even more deeply was the simple fact of his trust. We obey, they said together. We will not disappoint your Majesty. Lucian nodded, satisfied. Good. Those words put me at ease. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was gentle but carried a quiet, unquestionable authority. Remember, go forward and do your best. The full strength of the Unova Kingdom stands behind you. Only don't forget to keep growing yourselves. By this time next year, I hope all 5 of you are still standing here. The words landed with weight. Every one of them thought immediately of what Lucian had declared in the arena, that next year's tournament would give challengers the right to take their seats. The sense of urgency was immediate and real. Yes, Your Majesty. Having entrusted everything, Lucian didn't linger. He rose from the throne, straightened his royal robes with an unhurried hand, and spoke with the faintest trace of amusement in his voice. The ceremony is concluded. I'll take my leave. The inauguration formalities, staff arrangements, and duty assignments, the League President will see to all of it. The League President was also his man. Nothing more needed to be said. With Elif at his side, he turned and walked away, leaving the 5 newly appointed League members standing in the Grand Hall. Only after his figure had disappeared completely from sight did anyone exhale. Derek let out a slow breath and turned to Anna with a wry smile. Champion, why do I get the feeling our lives from here on won't exactly be restful? Anna looked in the direction Lucian had gone, her expression soft with respect and quiet warmth. She touched the medal on her chest lightly, and a confident smile settled on her lips. That's only natural. But isn't this the greatest proof that His Majesty trusts us enough to place everything in our hands? Freya's eyes lit up. Exactly. We have to make something worthy of that trust. We can't let His Majesty down. Lucas and Raphael exchanged a glance, then nodded. Former rivals, now comrades standing side by side. The era of the Unova Kingdom League had only just begun. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Lucian had already settled comfortably into his familiar lounge chair. Warm black tea was placed in his hands, and a Minccino clambered cheerfully onto his lap. In the ecological garden behind him, the Pokémon went about their peaceful afternoon. From somewhere in the distance, the faint sounds of Lucian City's plaza drifted through the air. Lucian sipped his tea and let his eyes close contentedly. Champion, handled. Elite Four, handled. Every troublesome administrative matter is handled. From this point forward, he could live properly. No more paperwork, no more fretting over small affairs. Just tea, sunshine, and Pokémon every day, like a perfectly comfortable king with nothing pressing to do. But of course, that was impossible. The steamship he had dispatched to explore distant lands had not yet returned. And there was still the matter of Cameron City in the Kanto region, a danger quietly waiting. Lucian had already made up his mind, he would find a way to help Aaron. At the same time, he intended to guide Kanto toward establishing its own Pokémon League and trainer framework, strengthening the ties between the two regions. He exhaled softly. What a long road ahead. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Lucian City was as quiet and peaceful as ever in the early morning. Sunlight streamed in through the castle's stained glass windows, casting soft, colored patterns across the carpets. Lucian, for once, woke entirely on his own, no duties calling him before he was ready. He stretched slowly, rose, and made his way up to the rooftop. The maids, having waited patiently, moved with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed routine, one pressing a warm towel into Lucian's hands, another offering a freshly brewed cup of rose tea. Your Majesty, the weather is pleasant today and the garden flowers are in full bloom, Elif said softly. Would you like to rest a while? Lucian accepted the teacup, took a slow sip, and sighed with quiet satisfaction. No need. I'll sit here, take in the sun, and enjoy the view. He settled back into his chair and let his gaze drift toward the distant Pokémon League headquarters. Even from here, the signs of overwhelming activity were plain to see. For the past 3 days, Anna and the Elite Four had been working almost without pause. League regulations drafted and refined, gym leaders appointed, wild Pokémon disturbances across multiple regions addressed, trainer qualifications reviewed, Pokémon centers in towns and cities coordinated, all of it piled before 5 people at once. Inside the League's meeting room, documents covered every surface. Anna sat at the head of the table, moving through paperwork at a steady pace, issuing assignments without breaking her rhythm. Derek, you're handling the conflict in the Western region's Dragon-type Pokémon habitats. Freya, Eastern region, Grass-type and Bug-type gym examinations. Lucas, the report of illegal poaching on the northern border is yours. Raphael, I need a protection plan for the southern region's Pokémon. Get it to me quickly. All 4 of them felt their heads swim, but each agreed in turn. Derek pressed his fingers against his temples and laughed despite himself. His Majesty certainly seems to be enjoying himself up there, handing every last piece of kingdom business down to us. This is considerably more exhausting than training. Still, with greater responsibility came greater honor. As a member of the Elite Four, Derek's standing had risen to something he could scarcely have imagined a year ago, and his monthly salary reflected it. He had already begun making arrangements to bring his mother from Castelia City to Lucian City, so she could live somewhere comfortable at last. That counted for something, he thought. Freya set down her pen and nodded with feeling. I just want to go home and sleep. Raphael sighed. I managed 3 hours last night. Lucas slid slowly down in his chair until he was barely upright. If I'd known it would be like this, I might have tried a little less hard in the competition. Anna let out a quiet laugh at the chorus of complaints. She set her own pen down and glanced toward the castle. His Majesty has placed something genuinely important in our hands. It's only right that we give it everything we have. Besides, we'll be able to rest properly in a few days. The year was nearly over, and the Pokémon League observed a regular winter recess. When that came, they could all go home, return to their families dressed in the clothes of people who had made something of themselves. Freya was already picturing the faces of her hometown neighbors when they found out. One of the Elite Four. Working directly for His Majesty Lucian. Can you imagine? The looks of sheer disbelief would be absolutely worth it. Derek had a similar feeling. A year ago he had been waiting tables at a tavern. Now he was Elite Four. If certain people back in Castelia heard about that, they would probably refuse to believe it. Raphael wore a quieter smile than the others. His circumstances were different. He came from a noble family in Oplucid City that had fallen on hard times. Now that he had secured a seat among the Elite Four, perhaps his family could begin to rebuild. That thought alone made every sleepless night worthwhile. Up in the castle, Lucian sat unhurried in the warm morning sun, feeding small pieces of an exquisite pastry to Volcarona and Dragonite as they lounged nearby. Elif stood at a respectful distance, delivering his brief daily report on League affairs. Your Majesty, Champion Anna and the Elite Four have resolved 17 Pokémon-related disputes over the past few days and suppressed 3 poaching operations. Order across the kingdom has largely been restored. Lucian nodded. The gap that had long existed in the Unova Kingdom's structure had finally been filled. As for the poaching, that was a more complicated matter, and he knew it. Where demand existed, harm would follow. From the moment a trainer began their journey, the desire for rare and powerful Pokémon was born alongside it. Certain noble families, unwilling to let their children start from nothing, spared no expense acquiring them through whatever means available. The lure of profit was not something that laws alone could extinguish. Stricter regulations would help, but there would always be those willing to take the risk. The question of how to truly address it lingered in the back of his mind, without a clean answer. Chapter 232, Homecoming. Elif approached with a slight frown, stepping forward quietly. Your Majesty, poaching has been repeatedly suppressed, but its root cause lies not in the law, it lies in supply and demand. Lucian took a small bite of a sweet pastry. Volcarona nuzzled gently against his fingertips. Go on. Nobles and wealthy merchants are willing to pay exorbitant prices for rare Pokémon, Elif continued, and that alone creates fertile ground for the black market to thrive. We can execute one group and arrest another, but as long as the profit exists, there will always be someone desperate enough to fill the gap. Lucian's expression shifted into quiet thought. After a moment, he said, then let's take the black market business and make it our own. Elif blinked. Your Majesty? Starting today, the Pokémon League will establish an official Pokémon breeding and care agency. Wild and rare Pokémon will be protected, not captured. However, offspring produced through registered breeding can be publicly listed, legally traded, and their prices will be regulated uniformly by the kingdom. Lucian paused, the framework of later generation Pokémon day care regulations forming clearly in his mind. A second decree will follow. Any Pokémon not registered through the League's official system will be barred from entering cities, from being traded, and from use in any official capacity. Anyone caught buying or selling outside the system faces consequences ranging from permanent loss of trading rights to full revocation of their trainer status, with a lifetime ban on Pokémon ownership. Elif's eyes lit up. Your Majesty is wise. If the black market yields no profit, it will collapse on its own without us ever needing to fight it directly. Not entirely, Lucian said, his gaze drifting toward the window. The revenue from legal transactions must be properly allocated. A portion goes to the gym leaders, a portion sustains the league, and the remainder, all of it is reinvested into wild Pokémon habitat protection. Profit channeled from trade, used to protect the very Pokémon that trade depended upon. In just a few quiet sentences, a framework of interlocking rules had taken shape across the breadth of the entire Unova Kingdom. Elif bowed with genuine admiration. I will arrange it immediately. Lucian waved a hand and settled back into his chair, eyes drifting upward to the clouds moving slowly across the sky. One more thing, establish a Forest Ranger Corps and an International Police Division. recruit rangers externally and charge them with protecting Pokémon habitats and conducting rescues in the wild. As for larger criminal cases involving Pokémon, coordinate with Interpol and Officer Jenny. All major cases will be handed to them to manage. Yes, Your Majesty. Elif bowed again. I will see to it. Lucian nodded. It was the end of November, year 151 of the Kingdom calendar. The year was drawing quietly to a close. Almost over, he murmured to himself. Minccino, clutching a small berry, hopped up onto his shoulder and pressed its soft head against his cheek. Lucian reached up and stroked it absently, thinking, as he often did lately, of how quickly time moved. The final days of the year arrived on a bitter wind that carried fine snowflakes down onto every town across the Unova Kingdom. Inside the League building, the mountain of documents had finally been whittled down to less than half its former height. Anna looked at the calendar, then looked at the 4 exhausted faces around her, and sighed, a long, relieved exhale. We're going on holiday. The effect was immediate. Finally. Freya leapt to her feet, eyes shining like stars. I'm going straight home. My parents have to see me like this. Lucas rolled his aching shoulders with a groan that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his bones. Raphael set down the last of his documents and let out a slow, measured breath. I am going to sleep for 3 days without interruption, and I will not be answering for anyone. A quiet smile followed. He was also looking forward to going home, to restoring his family's standing, and showing certain people exactly what the Raphael name had become. Derek was already on his feet before Anna had finished speaking. His first priority was to bring his mother from Castelia City to Lucian City, to give her a stable and comfortable life at last. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Anna watched them all and said softly, "Come back on time. The League's first full year is only going to be busier than this one." Understood, champion. The 5 of them gathered their things, pinned on their medals and badges, and swept out of the League headquarters with the energy of people who had earned every moment of rest ahead of them. On the streets, passers-by stopped and stared. The Elite Four. Those are the Elite Four, personally appointed by His Majesty Lucian. The 4 of them walked with their heads high and their chests out, wearing their pride openly and without apology. They had earned that too. Up on the castle rooftop, Lucian held Minccino in his arms and watched the 5 figures moving through the streets below. A soft laugh escaped him. Elif, prepare New Year's gifts for each of them. A 5th share apiece, as a personal reward from me. Yes, Your Majesty. Elif understood perfectly. The king's gift didn't need to be lavish, only enough to allow 5 newly risen powerhouses to return to their hometowns and establish themselves with dignity. On the streets of Lucian City, the 5 said their farewells and set off in different directions. Raphael and Lucas were both headed to Oplucid City, which the steam line already served directly, so they boarded the train together. Derek and Freya were bound for Castelia City and a small southern coastal town respectively, neither of which the steam line yet reached, so both arranged flying Pokémon taxis for the journey. Freya was the first to arrive home. Her hometown was a quiet little village in southern Unova, where the residents made their living growing berries and raising grass-type Pokémon. Life there moved slowly and simply, the way it always had. When Freya walked into the village wearing her League uniform and the Elite Four badge pinned at her chest, the entire village seemed to stop breathing for a moment, and then erupted at once. That's Freya! It really is her! She's become one of the Elite Four, personally appointed by His Majesty Lucian. Our village has an Elite Four member. Should we rename the village? Neighbors and elders pressed forward, their faces full of awe and pride in open disbelief. Even the young men and women who had once talked themselves out of becoming trainers, out of fear of wild Pokémon, out of comfort, out of doubt, now wore expressions of undisguised envy. If they had set out when they had the chance, could that have been them? In a house at the edge of the village, a woman in an apron heard the commotion outside. She untied her apron strings, stepped out the door to see what the fuss was about, and froze. There, in the middle of the crowd, was her daughter. Mother! Freya's voice cracked open with joy, both arms rising. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She pushed through the crowd without a word and pulled her daughter close. The woman's hands moved over her daughter's face, her shoulders, her arms, as though reassuring herself that this was real. "You're back. You're really back. Mother, I met His Majesty Lucian." Freya's eyes lit up as she looked around at the gathered crowd. "I competed with my Pokémon and won, and now I'm one of the Elite Four of the Unova Kingdom, a title bestowed by His Majesty himself. We all serve him now." The townspeople broke into exclamations of wonder. "What kind of person is His Majesty Lucian?" "Freya, did you thank His Majesty properly?" "Yes." Freya nodded emphatically. "His Majesty Lucian is an extraordinary king, the most powerful I've ever seen." At around the same time, a flying Pokémon taxi descended slowly over Castelia City. A year had passed, and Derek had finally come home. Clutching his pack, he didn't linger on the streets, he walked straight toward the house. It sat on the outskirts of Castelia, a worn-down mansion that had been left to age without care for years. When it rained, water came through the roof. In the small vegetable garden out front, a hunched figure moved steadily between the rows, an older woman with a bent back, working without pause. Derek's eyes reddened the moment he saw her. His mother. His father had died when he was still a boy, and she had raised him alone, earning their living by the needle and thread, weaving day after day. "Mum." His voice came out rough. The woman in the garden looked up, and her face broke open with joy. "Derek, oh, you've finally come back." He crossed the yard in a few strides and took her hands in his. They were rough and cracked from years of work. "Mum, I've become Elite Four. I work for the Pokémon League now, and I earn a proper salary every month." She didn't seem particularly concerned with any of that. She looked him over slowly, carefully, the way only a mother does, and after a long pause, said simply, "You're thin." Tears ran down her face. Derek pulled her gently into his arms, his voice quiet but certain. "We don't have to struggle anymore. I've settled in Lucian City, we'll live there together from now on. You don't have to work like this anymore." He reached into his pack and placed his league salary and Lucian's New Year's gift carefully into her hands. The smile that crossed his mother's face at that moment was the most beautiful thing Derek had ever seen. The boy who had once scraped by at the very bottom had built something, through his own hands, his own will, and lifted his family up with him. In Oplucid City, Lucas arrived home to find his parents exactly as he had always known them, honest, steady, and simply glad their son was safe. When he appeared at the door wearing his Elite Four credentials, they stared for a long, silent moment before the tears came. The neighbors gathered quickly, and those who remembered the mischievous, restless boy he had once been looked at the composed and powerful young man before them with open amazement. "Son." His father placed a hand on his shoulder, voice thick. "You've done well." Lucas stood tall, and felt it. Something solid and warm settling in his chest. In the older part of Oplucid City, Raphael returned to his family's somewhat crumbling noble estate. The Raphael family had once carried a proud name, but hard years had worn it down, and certain other noble houses had made no effort to hide their contempt. That changed the moment word spread that Raphael had been appointed to the Elite Four by the king himself. Suddenly, families that had been cold and dismissive were sending representatives to arrange formal visits. The old mansion, quiet for so long, filled with movement and noise. Raphael received them all with measured composure, neither bitter nor boastful. He simply let the facts speak. From this point forward, no one would look down on his family's name again. The once struggling Raphael household entered the new year reborn. And Raphael knew, with perfect clarity, exactly where that renewal had come from, the unhurried, tea-drinking, apparently idle king in the castle, who somehow managed to arrange everything while appearing to do nothing at all. After distributing the bulk of the league's salaries to the Elite Four and the champion, Lucian settled comfortably into the pace he had been quietly anticipating for months. On New Year's Day, he made the journey to Eindhoven to share a meal with the old king and Victini. Victini, who had not seen him in some time, attached herself to him the moment he walked in and refused to let go. The old king sat across from him and watched the young man who had grown so noticeably since he had first arrived, and felt the quiet weight of everything that had changed. He had watched it all unfold, a kingdom renewed, its people steadier and more prosperous, its future no longer something to fear. And he himself no longer needed to spend his remaining years anxious over succession and strife. He could simply rest. He supposed that was probably the best possible outcome. He sighed softly, and said nothing. Lucian stayed only briefly before returning to Lucian City. Time moved the way it always does, quietly, without announcement. Winter turned to spring, and before long it was April of year 152 of the kingdom calendar. With the champion and elite four actively managing the kingdom's Pokémon affairs, the wild Pokémon conflicts across Unova were resolved in short order. Under their guidance, the relationship between people and Pokémon continued to deepen and grow. One calm afternoon in April, Lucian was reclined on the castle rooftop with his Pokémon, half dozing in the warm spring sunlight, when a leaf came in from outside, and for once, his composure was entirely gone. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty, the fleet you dispatched last year to explore beyond the kingdom has returned." Lucian was on his feet before he had fully woken up. "Where are they?" "Docked near Undella Town Harbor. Captain Columbus has already made his way to Lucian City, he's waiting outside the throne hall to report." "I'll be right there." The two of them moved quickly through the castle and into the throne hall, where a tall, broad-shouldered man with deeply bronzed skin stood waiting. Columbus, captain of the expedition fleet. The moment he saw Lucian, he dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty, I am glad to report I have not failed the mission entrusted to me. Tell me everything." Lucian leaned forward slightly, patience already thin with excitement. Columbus rose and began. "After departing the shores of Unova, we sailed open ocean for the better part of a year. In that time, we made landfall on 3 large landmasses and established contact with each. The first is an archipelago in the open sea. Its people are at an early stage of development, no unified nation, no central governance. The inhabitants still live in tribal communities. They call their land Alola." Alola. Lucian's eyes sharpened at once. "We traded with the islanders using the honey, cheese, coffee, and carpets we had brought aboard, and received a great deal of local produce in exchange. Our men also collected a number of native Pokémon, as instructed." "Where are they now?" Lucian said immediately. "Bring them in." Columbus grinned and turned, waving toward the hall entrance. Several sailors entered carrying large sacks of Pokeballs between them. "Come on then, let His Majesty have a look." One by one, the Pokeballs opened. Flash after flash of white light filled the throne hall, and the Pokémon materialized across the floor in a sprawling, curious crowd. Rowlet, Litten, Poplio, Grubbin, Yungoos, Alolan Meowth, Alolan Diglett, Alolan Dugtrio, Rockruff, Morlul, Stufful, Passimian, Mimikyu, Alolan Vulpix, Alolan Exeggutor, and Lovedusk. Chapter 233, New Pokémon. So many Pokémon at once. Lucian's eyes moved across the crowded throne hall with undisguised delight. Rowlet, Litten, and Poplio, the 3 starter Pokémon of the Alola region, each one distinct and full of character. Behind them, Alolan Dugtrio, Rockruff, Morlul, Stufful, all bearing that unmistakable Alolan quality. And Morlul in particular caught his attention, a Pokémon that emitted a natural, steady glow in darkness, requiring no fuel, producing no smoke. A living light source. The implications alone were fascinating. As for Alolan Vulpix, he had to admit, it was unreasonably adorable. And Lovedusk. Even here, even now, a Pokémon practically synonymous with the Alola region's identity. "Not bad at all," Lucian said, with more warmth than he usually allowed himself in formal settings. The newly arrived Pokémon were exploring with full curiosity. Some moved hesitantly, a little overwhelmed by the grand marble hall and the unfamiliar faces. Others had already abandoned all caution and were skidding back and forth across the polished floor with great enthusiasm. "Everyone, return to your Pokeballs for now," Columbus called out, grinning, and directed his sailors to begin recalling them one by one. Once the hall had quieted, Columbus straightened and moved on to the rest of his report. "After departing the Alola Islands, our fleet continued across open ocean for roughly another month before reaching a second large landmass. The region is called Kalos, ruled by a kingdom of the same name. We were received and invited to meet King Az in the capital. King Az was surprised to learn of our intentions. He instructed his ministers to negotiate with us, but the situation there is unsettled. Columbus paused briefly. According to the locals, the Kalos kingdom is currently at war with a nation called the Galar kingdom. Lucian's expression stilled. Az. Kalos. Galar. At war. So it had already begun. The implications unfolded quickly in his mind. If the war was already underway, then the question of Floet's fate was already in motion. And the ultimate weapon, Az's creation, what his brother had called the divine artifact, would not be far behind. It was a device that had no business existing in this era. An instrument of war born from grief, originally built to resurrect a beloved Pokémon, then transformed into something capable of ending the conflict entirely by destroying both sides at once. The final result had been catastrophic. Az himself had been altered by the weapon's energy and rendered immortal. When Floet understood what the resurrection had cost, the lives of countless Pokémon consumed to power it, she left him. The war had gutted the Kalos region and brought ruin upon Galar in equal measure. A mutual defeat, with no real victors. The two regions had been left hostile and estranged for generations afterward, their wounds only beginning to heal with the eventual establishment of the modern Pokémon League. The ultimate weapon itself had been buried and sealed underground by Az and his brother, until, in a later era, it would be unearthed and reactivated by those who had no idea what they were unleashing. Lucian's fingers tapped slowly against the armrest of the throne. He could go to Kalos. He could try to intervene, to prevent or at least limit the damage the ultimate weapon would cause. But beyond that, something else tugged at the edge of his thoughts. Something he had turned over in his mind more than once. Az's immortality. If such a thing were possible, a life extended close to eternity, then he could remain. He could stay beside Dragonite, Superior, Volcarona, all of them, without the slow creeping dread of outliving the ones he cared for most. A trip to Kalos, he thought. It may be necessary. Columbus continued his report. As a gesture of goodwill, King Az also presented us with a collection of Kalos native Pokémon. He signaled to his first mate, who directed the sailors to bring forward another chest of Pokeballs. One by one they opened, and the throne hall filled again with light. Chasepin, Fennekin, Froakie, Flababy, Bunnelby, Scatterbug, Litleo, Florges, Skiddo, Gogoat, Pancham, Skrelp, Helioptile, Deden, and Klefki. Lucian studied them carefully. Chasepin and Froakie both had real potential as starter Pokémon for new trainers in the Unova region. Bunnelby, excellent for farming and land clearing. Scatterbug could assist with pollination across the agricultural areas. Florges, Pancham, and Flababy were well suited to enriching Lucian City's ecological spaces. And Gogoat, perhaps the most immediately practical of all. Besides producing milk, Gogoat were gentle by nature, capable of generating energy from sunlight through the leaves on their backs, and had coexisted with humans in a working relationship for over 5,000 years by the oldest records. A Pokémon that asked for little and gave a great deal. Good, Lucian said, with a satisfied nod. Columbus recalled the Pokémon and pressed on. After leaving Kalos, we continued south along the continent's coastline. The landmass is considerably larger than Unova. At its southern reaches lies a nation called the Paldea Kingdom. He paused for a moment before continuing, as if still processing what he had found there. That place has been overtaken by a treasure-hunting frenzy. After considerable investigation, we learned the source of it. At the very center of Paldea lies an enormous geological formation known as the Great Crater of Paldea. The locals believe it contains treasures of extraordinary value. The promise of what might be found there has drawn adventurers and explorers from across the land, all competing to be the first to reach whatever lies at the bottom. Paldea. Lucian turned the name over in his mind. From what he knew, Paldea and Kalos were indeed situated close to one another on the continent. Images surfaced unbidden, Koraidon and Nuraidon, the ancient and future Paradox Pokémon, and the displaced creatures that surrounded them. What Pokémon did you find there? He asked, leaning forward. Columbus brushed his hands together and nodded to the last of his sailors, who brought forward the final collection. Flash after flash of white light filled the throne hall, and a new group of entirely unfamiliar Pokémon materialized before Lucian. Sprigatito, Fuecoco, Quaxly, Lechonk, Fidough, Mastiff, Smoliv, Knackley, Charcadet, Tinkadink, Cyclizer, and Frigibax. Lucian's face broke into a wide, genuine smile. Fidough and Mastiff, not the strongest battlers, but as farming Pokémon they were in a class of their own. Both emitted a natural fragrance that promoted the growth and healthy harvest of grain crops. With Landorus already enriching the soil across Unova with renewed vitality, and these two Pokémon added into the mix, Lucian was prepared to guarantee that within a year at most, his people would no longer have to worry about food shortages. That alone made the entire expedition worthwhile. And Smoliv, its fully evolved form, Arboliva, produced a rich and flavorful olive oil of exceptional quality, ideal for cooking and nutrition. A valuable addition to the kingdom's food culture. Then there was Knackley. This rock-salt Pokémon could produce large quantities of high-grade salt naturally, and not ordinary salt either. It was said to carry remarkable restorative properties, capable of accelerating the healing of even serious wounds when applied to injured Pokémon. The medical implications alone were significant. Lucian's gaze moved on to the others. Charcadet's body ran hot enough to be useful in combat and as a reliable firestarter, practical in more ways than one. Tinkadink, with its raw physical strength and natural affinity for metalwork, would have been an extraordinary apprentice in any blacksmith's workshop in this era. And Cyclizer, gentle in temperament, sturdy in build, perfectly suited as a means of transportation. He looked across the assembled Pokémon and felt a deep, quiet satisfaction settle over him. His decision to launch the Age of Exploration had been the right one. With these Pokémon joining the kingdom, the pace of Unova's development would accelerate considerably. He straightened in his seat and turned to Elif. Reward them well. Columbus's face lit up. He dropped to one knee immediately. Thank you, Your Majesty. We will. Rest for a few days first, Lucian said. Once the fleet is fully restocked and the crew has recovered, prepare to set sail again. Yes, Your Majesty. Columbus and his sailors withdrew one by one, their footsteps fading down the corridor. Lucian returned to his study. He sat down, took out paper and pen, and carefully wrote out a summary of each new Pokémon, their characteristics, their temperaments, and their most practical applications. When he was finished, he passed the pages to Elif. Have someone take proper care of those Pokémon. Give them time to adjust to life here before gradually introducing them to other regions of the kingdom. Introducing foreign Pokémon was not something to be rushed. Releasing them directly into the wild risked destabilizing local ecosystems in ways that would be difficult to undo. The process needed to be managed carefully, gradually, with the right people overseeing it every step of the way. Yes, Your Majesty. Elif took the documents, bowed quietly, and withdrew. The heavy study door swung shut behind him, sealing out the noise of the outside world. Lucian leaned back in his chair, fingertips resting lightly on the polished desk surface, his thoughts moving like deep water, slow on the surface, restless underneath. The Kalos War. The ultimate weapon. AZ's immortality. The great crater of Paldea. Outside the window, the sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting Lucian City's castle walls and streets in long strokes of warm gold and amber. A handful of swana crossed the sky in a clean arc below. The citizens of Lucian City moved through their evening routines alongside their Pokémon. This was what several years of relentless work had built. He had built the Unova kingdom with his own hands. Fertile land nourished by Landorus. A vast landscape of peace and order. A home where humans and Pokémon lived side by side, not as master and tool, but as companions. A force capable of protecting all of it. From a penniless transmigrator with nothing but knowledge and will, to the unifying king of Unova, he had climbed here step by step, guided by his understanding of this world and the loyal Pokémon who had walked every part of that road beside him. And yet, when Lucian looked out across all of it, his eyes were not entirely filled with satisfaction. Alola, Kalos, Paldea. Columbus had brought back more than new Pokémon and resources. He had brought back a door opening onto the entire world. The Kalos War. The Immortal King. The ultimate weapon. Eternal life. The words came out barely above a whisper. His fingertips moved unconsciously along the windowsill. He had power. He ruled a kingdom. He had loyal subjects, trusted companions, and everything he had once set out to build. Dragonite, Serperior, Volcarona, they had been with him from nothing, all the way to here. But Pokémon, however long-lived, were not without an end. And human life was as brief as morning dew, gone before you had properly noticed it had arrived. He did not fear war. He did not fear political scheming or the difficult road ahead. What he feared was time, its indifference, its patience, the quiet way it would eventually take everything he loved and leave him standing alone. But the immortality he sought was nothing like AZ's. Not that cursed, blood-soaked endurance, purchased at the cost of countless lives. What Lucian wanted was simpler and more personal than that, to remain. To stay beside Dragonite, Serperior, and Volcarona. To watch the Unova kingdom continue to grow and flourish. To protect, for as many years as could be found, the people and Pokémon who depended on him. And Kalos was not a simple place. More names surfaced in his mind. Xerneas, the god of life. Yveltal, the god of death. Zygarde, the guardian of order and balance, silent warden of the ecosystem. Three forces in uneasy equilibrium, presiding over a region on the edge of war. Lucian rose slowly from his chair and walked to the window. Below, Lucian City was settling into the golden quiet of evening. The land he had shaped spread out before him, and deep within his eyes, something steady and resolved began to burn. The fleet had opened new routes across the world. The Pokémon of Alola, Kalos, and Paldea would gradually become part of Unova's living fabric, new energy flowing into agriculture, into craftsmanship, into transportation, into the daily lives of ordinary people. Before long, hunger and scarcity would be words that belonged to the past. His people would know genuine stability, genuine warmth. And after that, he would go himself. To Kalos. To meet the immortal King AZ face to face. To seek what the ultimate weapon truly was. To intervene, if he could, in a war that history said would end in mutual destruction. To protect the Pokémon who should never have had to die for it. And, for himself and for the companions who meant everything to him, to find a path forward that was not shadowed by inevitable loss. The night breeze moved softly across the rooftop, carrying with it the scent of flowers and earth and Pokémon. Kyurem, who had been resting quietly to one side, raised its head. It seemed to sense something in Lucian's stillness. A low, resonant cry rose from deep in its chest. Lucian smiled. It seems you've made your decision too. He turned to face Kyurem fully. I only want to do what I should. To seek my own hope and truth. And since I'm here, I can't simply stand by and watch so many innocent lives be lost to something that could be prevented. His gaze moved to Dragonite, Serperior, and Volcarona resting nearby. Something in his expression softened. And I want to do everything I can to stay beside you. Kyurem held his gaze for a long moment. Then it exhaled, and gave a single, unhurried nod. Then go. Whatever comes, we face it together. Lucian turned back to the window. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. Our road is still very long. Below, Lucian City glowed warmly in the last light of the day. The world beyond its borders, vast, uncharted, and full of consequence, seemed to slowly open itself before his eyes. In the twilight of year 152 of the kingdom calendar, the king of Unova had turned his gaze toward a horizon far wider than any sea his fleet had yet crossed. Chapter 234, A Great Harvest. The fleet commanders rested in Lucian City for half a month, then set sail once more, continuing their search across the open ocean. Though he had made up his mind to go to Kalos, Lucian was in no particular hurry. He stayed in Lucian City, watching Anna and the Elite Four work through the affairs of the Pokémon League with steady, growing competence. He watched a new group of young trainers receive their first Pokémon and set off into the world with bright, uncertain eyes. He watched the kingdom's workers and Pokémon laboring side by side in the heat, laying railway lines and power grids outward from Lucian City toward the far corners of Unova. Everything moved with purpose and order. At night, he stood on the castle rooftop with his Pokémon and watched the lights come on across Lucian City, one window at a time. Even without his direct involvement, the country ran. It breathed on its own. Knock. 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 Come in. Elif entered, his face bright with barely contained excitement. Your Majesty, the harvest reports from the various regions have come in. Lucian turned from the window. Oh. A great harvest, Your Majesty. Elif's voice rose with genuine feeling. This spring, the entire kingdom has seen an unprecedentedly abundant yield. Every storehouse is full to overflowing. And the berry cultivation you expanded last year has also come in exceptionally well. He paused, letting the weight of it land properly. From this year forward, the common people and Pokémon throughout the kingdom will not go hungry. Lucian was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. Very good. He had done it. Your Majesty, Elif continued, there are also reports coming in from villages and towns across the kingdom. The people have begun building shrines to Landorus. Lucian didn't give it a great deal of thought. Given how things had unfolded, it seemed almost inevitable. Even thousands of years into the future, the legend of Landorus would likely still be circulating throughout Unova, and because of his presence here, the shape of that future had already shifted in ways he could only partially foresee. Arthur and the others should be returning soon, Lucian said. Arthur was the young man he had sent out with Landorus, Thundurus, and Tornadus, traveling the breadth of Unova, improving the land's soil quality and clearing the latent energy disruptions that had held back the country's growth for generations. Arthur and his group have already reached Lacunosa town, Elif confirmed. They should arrive within a few days. See that he's rewarded properly when he returns. Lucian paused. Lacunosa, it's changed considerably, hasn't it? Elif nodded. Because of your arrangements, Lacunosa town was among the earliest to receive a steam train connection. With the large population of Ice-type Pokémon in the surrounding area, it's become a destination for trainers looking to train or catch Ice-types. The town grew faster than almost anywhere else in the region. It's a proper city now. Lucian nodded slowly. His arrival had changed a great many things. Some of them he had planned. Others had simply grown on their own, from seeds he hadn't consciously planted. 3 days later, a steam train rolled into Lucian City from the direction of Lacunosa town, its whistle cutting a long, clear note across the morning air. At the station, a crowd had already gathered on both sides of the platform, and the moment the train came to a stop, the cheering that broke out was enough to shake the rafters. Not only because of Arthur's return, but because of the 3 figures that descended behind him. Landorus moved wreathed in soft, steady Earth-type energy. Wherever it stepped, grass pushed up through the cracks between the stones. Thundurus and Tornadus flanked it on either side, their wild, restless energy settled into something calmer and more composed than anyone who had known them before would have recognized. These 3 legendary Pokémon, beings that had once stirred the heavens and split the earth, walked quietly and obediently behind a single young man, and the sight of it brought people in the crowd to their knees without a word being spoken. Arthur himself had changed. His clothes were worn and travel-stained, mud and grass still marking the fabric, but his face carried a resolution that hadn't been there when he left. He descended the platform steps without hurrying, his gaze moving through the crowd until it found Lucian standing at the front. He dropped to one knee without hesitation. Your Majesty. His voice was clear and steady. Arthur has not failed in his duty. Together with Lord Landorus, Lord Thundurus, and Lord Tornadus, we have traveled throughout Unova, enriching the soil, clearing the land's disrupted energy, and cultivating the earth across the entire kingdom. Everything has been restored to life, and left more fertile than before. The words fell over the crowd, and for a moment the entire station held its breath. Then the cheering erupted, wave after wave of it, rolling out across the platform and into the streets beyond. Lucian stepped forward and reached down, helping Arthur to his feet himself. He looked at the young man standing before him, the same person who had left Lucian's city as a somewhat naive boy, and who had returned as something noticeably different, and let the praise show plainly in his eyes. "You've worked hard, Arthur. You've done very well. Without you accompanying Landoris across every mountain and river and lake in this kingdom, there would have been no great harvest this year. The common people in Pokémon would not have escaped poverty as they have. Every effort you made, we all saw it. Your Majesty." Arthur's voice faltered. His eyes were bright with emotion he was struggling to contain. He had never imagined this. He had come from a farming family, ordinary in every way, nothing remarkable about him at all. That a king would look at him and speak to him like this was more than he had ever allowed himself to expect. And compared to what His Majesty Lucian had done for all of them, what Arthur had contributed felt small. And yet... His voice steadied. His expression became resolute. "Arthur swears to serve and protect your Majesty, with his life if necessary." Lucian blinked. With his life? He kept his expression composed. "Rise. You've had a long journey, rest well." He turned to Alif, who stepped forward at once and addressed the assembled crowd in a clear, carrying voice. Young Arthur, brave and steadfast, with the people always in his heart, obeyed His Majesty's command and accompanied the three Lords of the Skies on their journey throughout Unova, improving the land and making an immeasurable contribution to the kingdom and its people. Arthur is hereby appointed President of the Unova Kingdom Pokémon Agricultural Association, responsible for all matters of farmland improvement, soil management, and berry cultivation across the kingdom, and for leading the integration of Pokémon into agriculture nationwide. He is granted a residence in Lucian City, free access to the Royal Palace and Pokémon League headquarters, and the honorary title of Distinguished Unova Trainer. He may select a starter Pokémon from any location within the League system, and shall receive treatment equivalent to that of the champion. Arthur was trembling by the time Elif finished. He dropped back to one knee, and when he spoke, his voice cracked with the effort of holding himself together. "Arthur thanks your Majesty, from the bottom of his heart. Arthur swears to serve your Majesty faithfully, to the end." Lucian stared at him for a long moment. This child is entirely sincere. He reached out and rested a hand briefly on Arthur's shoulder, then turned his gaze to the three legendary Pokémon standing quietly nearby. He gave them a slow, acknowledging nod. Looking at the scene before him, the last trace of worry that had lingered in the back of his mind finally dissolved. The Unova Kingdom was truly at peace. The trainer profession was flourishing, with Anna and the Elite Four carrying the work of guiding humanity and Pokémon forward with steady, capable hands. Officer Jenny led the police force and its coordination with the international police, maintaining law and order across the regions. Gerald commanded the army, stationed throughout the kingdom, a reliable shield at every border. Everything was in place. Everything was held. And so, at last, he could leave without looking back. Not as a private traveler. Not quietly, without announcement. He would go as the King of Unova, sailing to the Kalos region to meet AZ. Chapter 235, Kalos. 2 days passed, and Lucian had settled everything thoroughly. He chose not to travel with a fleet or a formal escort. Only his Pokémon, Kyurem, Dragonite, Serperior, and Volcarona. In the castle courtyard, Anna had gathered the core league members to see him off. There was no ceremony, only a few quiet words. Everything on the Unova side has been properly handed over. The league, security, and agriculture, everyone holds their position. There will be no problems. Lucian's gaze moved over the assembled faces, his voice unhurried and calm. "Sensei." Anna's composure slipped slightly. "Please be careful out there." "Don't worry." A warm smile crossed his face. "Protect Lucian City. Protect the kingdom. I'm leaving it in your hands." He crouched down beside the Minccino clustered at his feet, all of them pressing close with small, reluctant faces, and gently stroked each one in turn. Don't worry, I'll be back before long. While I'm away, you listen to Elif. No wandering off, understand? The Minchino nodded their small heads in rapid, earnest succession. Elif stepped forward, his expression carrying the particular look of someone who had something more to say and wasn't sure he should say it. Your Majesty, are you certain you don't wish to send an envoy to Kalos first? To inform their king of your coming? Lucian considered it briefly, then shook his head. Not yet. I want to observe the situation there myself, without announcing my presence. When the time is right, I'll reveal my identity as King of Unova and meet with King AZ directly. But the reports say the war there is still ongoing. Please take care, Elif said, the worry in his voice plain. Lucian smiled. Kuram will be with me the entire time. At those words, the faces around him shifted, and more than one person quietly recalled the Battle of the Three Kings, when Lucian had stood alone against the armies of the first and second princes and walked away from it. I know what I'm doing, he said simply. He turned, swung up onto Dragonite's back with practiced ease, and looked back at the group one last time. Go on. He raised a hand, not a grand farewell gesture, just a small, unhurried wave, and Dragonite's great wings spread wide. In a few powerful strokes they were airborne, the courtyard and the faces within it shrinking steadily below, until Lucian City itself was just a glittering shape against the green and the light, and then nothing at all. Dragonite's speed was something else entirely. Before long, the land had fallen away behind them and a vast expanse of deep blue ocean stretched in every direction. The sea wind pressed against Lucian's robes. Dragonite flew with the steady, unhurried confidence of something that had been made for exactly this, its silhouette clean and bright against the sunlight. Lucian looked back once at the receding Unova coastline, feeling a quiet reluctance, and then turned to face forward, where calm anticipation waited. More than half a day passed in the open air. Then, at the edge of the sea, a landmass slowly rose from the horizon, continuous, undulating, growing more distinct with every minute. Dragonite's wings carried them through the last layer of coastal mist, its round body tracing a smooth arc as it descended slightly. Lucian narrowed his eyes against the wind. Endless green mountains spread out below, rich with deep color. At the mountain foothills, the outlines of towns were visible, and rising above them, tall windmills turning slowly in the breeze, their peaks lost in low cloud. A tranquil scene, almost idyllic. And yet, on the distant horizon, thin columns of black smoke rose at irregular intervals. Beneath them, barely audible from this height, came a low and rolling sound like faraway thunder. As expected, Lucian murmured, one hand resting lightly on Dragonite's neck. The war is already here. He leaned forward slightly. Find somewhere quiet to land. Don't draw attention. Dragonite gave a soft, willing cry, folded its wings, and angled downward, skimming low over the water toward a sheltered bay lined with dense trees. In the distance, a city sat nestled between the mountains and the sea. Lucian didn't recognize it. He turned it over in his memory for a moment, then recalled Dragonite into its pokeball and continued on foot toward the city walls. As he drew closer, he noticed the signs. Scorch marks on the stonework, the faint smell of smoke still hanging in the air, fresh damage that hadn't yet been cleared away. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been long ago. Armored guards stood at the city gate in tight formation, and the moment they caught sight of Lucian approaching alone, they snapped to attention, spears lowering, voices sharp with suspicion. You there, who are you? State your business. Inside the city, the tension was palpable. Every soldier Lucian could see was wound tight, hands near weapons, eyes scanning. When they took in his appearance, the dark hair, the unfamiliar clothing, the foreign cut of everything about him, something in the nearest guard's face shifted from suspicion straight to fury. Another Galar spy. Everyone, to arms. A squad of guards came rushing out from the gatehouse in short order. Galar scum, get out. Lucian stood very still. Ah. So it was already at this stage. The Galar royal family had launched their invasion of Kalos, and the war was well underway. If events continued on their natural course, AZ's beloved Floette would die in the fighting. To bring her back, AZ would build the ultimate weapon, drawing on vast quantities of life energy, resurrecting Floette, and then turning that same weapon on Gaylor in an act of devastating grief-fueled revenge. And perhaps it was precisely that act, that one catastrophic moment, which would leave both regions scarred and estranged for generations to come. While these thoughts were still moving through his mind, the guards had fully surrounded him. He raised both hands, unhurried. "I think there may be some misunderstanding. I'm not from Gaylor. I'm simply a beast tamer passing through." The guards hesitated. They looked more carefully, and the anger on their faces shifted into something uncertain. The man before them had black hair and dark eyes. Gaylor people were typically fair-haired and light-eyed. This was someone else entirely. They didn't lower their weapons, but the hostility cooled slightly. "Where are you from, then?" "A region called Unova," Lucien said. "A beast tamer," one guard said slowly, still cautious. "Can you prove it? Where is your magical beast?" Lucien reached for Superior's pokeball and released it without ceremony. Superior emerged in a sweep of white light, drew itself to its full height, and regarded the assembled guards with the particular brand of unhurried disdain it reserved for everyone who wasn't Lucien. The effect on the guards was immediate. "A magical beast. That magical beast, it's enormous. And strong. You can feel it just standing near it." The weapons disappeared. Several guards straightened involuntarily, as though in the presence of someone considerably more important than a lone traveler in plain clothes. The nearest one bowed, his expression now thoroughly apologetic. "Forgive us, Lord Beast Tamer. We deeply apologize for the misunderstanding." "No harm done," Lucien said, recalling Superior. "But, where exactly is this place? From the look of things, there was fighting here recently." "This is Laver City, on the western coast of the Kalos Kingdom," the guard said, his voice dropping into something bitter and tired. "A year ago, the Gaylor royal family launched a full invasion against us. Their armies crossed into Kalos in force." His jaw tightened. "Yesterday, a Gaylor regiment attacked Laver directly. We held them off, barely, and pushed them back. But the cost was not small." Lucien said nothing for a moment. The Gaylor royal family. He had known this was coming, and still, hearing it laid out plainly gave him pause. Not content with claiming credit for repelling the Dark Day threat and securing their heroic reputation at home, they had turned outward, launching a war that would, if left unchecked, ultimately cost an innocent Pokémon her life, drive a grieving king to create a weapon that had no business existing, and leave two regions hollowed out and hostile for centuries. Chapter 236, Battle. The guards led Lucien through the city gate and into Laver City. The smell reached him first, smoke and dust, and, beneath it, the faint ghost of something floral, as though the city remembered what it had been before all this. Damaged wooden houses, collapsed walls, bloodstains still dark and wet on the cobblestones. Civilians huddled under eaves with hollow, exhausted faces. Only a few scattered flowers along the roadside still bloomed, stubborn and small against the wreckage surrounding them. Superior moved quietly at Lucien's side, its emerald body held with that characteristic upright pride, radiating a calm authority that seemed to settle over the street around it. Passers-by who noticed it stopped and stared, instinctively stepping aside to clear a path. "Lord Beast Tamer, this way please. Our lord is waiting at the manor." The guard's voice carried a threat of urgency. "He is in great need of capable assistance." Laver City. Lucien filed the name away and let his gaze move carefully across his surroundings. The grief here was not just in the damage to the buildings, it was in the air itself, in the way people moved and held themselves. The energy of yesterday's battle still hung over everything, and it wasn't difficult to imagine how brutal the fighting had been. They arrived at the city lord's manor before long. It stood in the center of the city, marked by scorched burns and the pitting of projectile impacts, but still upright, still carrying a certain dignity. A middle-aged man in silver armor was already waiting at the entrance. He had a long sword at his hip, a face built by years of difficult decisions, and eyes that assessed Lucien and Superior in a single practice sweep. "Word reached me that a beast tamer from distant lands had arrived. I am the Lord of Laver City, Laurent. He stepped forward, and when his gaze settled on Superior, something in his bearing shifted slightly, a degree more respect entering his tone. Thank you for coming to Laver at a time like this. What brings you so far from home? My name is Lucien. I'm from the Unova region, a traveling beast tamer, nothing more. Lucien kept his voice easy and his identity vague. I happened to be passing through and saw the smoke still rising over the city. I wanted to understand what was happening in the Kalos kingdom. Laurent's expression tightened with pain. He gestured toward the main hall. Lord Lucien, please come in. You are a guest from afar, and I will not hide anything from you. Kalos is in chaos. The Galar invasion has seen to that. They sat. Guards brought warm berry tea. Superior took up a position beside Lucien's chair, still and watchful, eyes half-lidded but missing nothing. The Galar army has been advancing south from the western coast, using their beast forces as their spearhead. Laurent's hands tightened around his cup, knuckles whitening. They have taken several of our fortresses in succession and scattered countless civilians. Our soldiers are brave, I will not hear otherwise, but Kalos has never specialized in beast combat the way Galar has. In the end, bravery alone has its limits. Lucien took a slow sip of tea. The trajectory of history was holding. The Galar invasion was the seed from which everything else would grow, all the grief, all the destruction, all the consequences that would echo forward across centuries. King Az, he said carefully. Has His Majesty not led a counteroffensive? Laurent's eyes dimmed. He exhaled slowly. His Majesty has been marshalling forces in the capital, but the Galar assault is relentless. Their beasts are heavily armored, they take to the air, and ordinary weapons cannot touch them. Our defensive lines have been pushed back continuously. He paused. Several days ago, a Galar beast corps launched an aerial assault directly toward the royal capital. Another pause, heavier than the last. His Majesty's closest beast companion was killed defending him. Lucien went still. Floette was already gone. He kept his expression composed, but the weight of it settled over him. If Floette was dead, then Az was already grieving in the royal capital, and a man like Az, with a mind like Az's, did not simply grieve. He built. He was likely already working on the ultimate weapon. Lord Laurent, Lucien said, setting down his cup. I have no intention of becoming involved in this war directly. But I will not stand by and watch the Galar army oppress civilians without consequence. If Laver comes under attack again while I am here, I will help. Laurent was on his feet before Lucien had finished speaking, and the bow he gave was deep and without reservation. If Lord Lucien would lend us his strength, the people of Laver City would be grateful beyond words. On behalf of every soldier and civilian within these walls, thank you. Then, from outside the city walls, a warning horn split the air. Followed immediately by shouting. Enemy attack, the Galar army is advancing. Beast corps in the air, they're coming again. Laurent's sword was in his hand before the echo had faded, his face set hard with grim fury. Already, how did they regroup so quickly? Lucien rose from his chair without hurry. He glanced at Superior, and something passed between them, a look, nothing more. It seems we won't need to wait after all. Superior. Prepare yourself. Superior lifted its head and let out a sharp, clear cry. A deep blue energy bloomed instantly across its body, its leaf-shaped crests fanning slightly open. The air in the hall changed. Lucien walked toward the city's outer walls. Sunlight cast his shadow long and narrow ahead of him on the ground. Above, the sky was changing. Dark clouds rolled in across the horizon, thickening and pressing lower. The battle cries of the Galar forces grew louder with every second, and then the sky itself seemed to go dark, blotted out by a formation of armored soldiers riding pitch-black, heavily plated Pokémon high above the city. Corvinite. Hundreds of them, gleaming like iron in the gray light, their riders disciplined and in tight formation. In the Galar region, they were said to be unmatched in aerial combat, an invincible force above the battlefield. Lucien looked up at them. Corviknight as cavalry mounts. Lucian hadn't anticipated that the Galar royal family had already organized them at this scale. Standing beneath the darkening sky, he felt it acutely, how differently each region had developed its relationship with Pokémon, and how vast the gap in combat application could be between them. But he was not afraid. Laurent was already moving, shouting orders as he climbed the city wall. Soldiers scrambled into position around him, crossbowmen and archers knocking and drawing, the cannons along the ramparts swinging to bear. Below, in the streets of Laver City, the elderly and the children pressed together in doorways and alleyways, faces turned upward, hollow with dread. They had survived yesterday's assault. Looking at the sky now, blackened by hundreds of armored wings, they knew, without needing to be told, that what was coming was worse. The Corviknight formation descended on the city with a sound like grinding iron, their metallic cries tearing through the air at a frequency that forced the defenders on the walls to clap their hands over their ears. A Galar rider on the lead Corviknight swept past in a blur, his lance gleaming, and drove it clean through a soldier's chest before anyone could react. The defenders around the fallen man went rigid with horror. Then two sharp sounds cut through the noise, the hiss of something moving very fast through air. Superior's leaf blade struck true, both hits landing precisely at the wing joints of the lead Corviknight, the only points where its heavy plating didn't fully cover. A sharp crack, a wretched shriek, and the lead Corviknight spun out of formation and plummeted, crashing hard into the ground beyond the outer wall. The effect on the defenders was immediate. Shoulders straightened. Grips tightened on weapons. The morale that had been on the verge of breaking held. But the Corviknight formation responded in the same instant. Every one of them beat their iron wings simultaneously, generating a concussive downdraft, and a volley of arrows rained down toward Superior from every angle. Superior, return. Superior twisted away and landed clean, breathing harder than usual, its green scales bright against the gray air. On the wall, Laurent's face had gone pale. His sword hand was shaking. Lord Lucian, there are too many. We cannot stop all of them. Below, the civilians had stopped whispering. They simply held each other. Lucian looked up at the mass of black iron filling the sky. His expression hadn't changed. His hand moved to the second pokeball at his side, fingers closing around it, and then he threw it upward with full force. Dragonite, go! The white light that erupted was blinding. What emerged from it was enormous. Dragonite spread its wings above the city, and the sound it made doing so was like a thunderclap. Its dragon tail swept a wide arc through the open air with a tearing roar. Its eyes, usually warm and bright, had gone cold in absolute. The pressure radiating off its body was of an entirely different order to anything the Corviknight formation had encountered, the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. Dragonite. Dual dragon and flying type. The undisputed sovereign of the Unova skies. Roar! The roar shook the air. Several Corviknight broke formation on instinct alone, their riders struggling to hold them steady as they lurched backward. A Galar officer snarled from his mount. Hold your positions. It's just a dragon type, attack in force. Steel wings, all units. The formation surged forward again, hundreds of Corviknight in tight mass, their black armor catching the gray light, iron wings beating in a unified rhythm like a tide of metal bearing down. Lucian's voice rose clear and steady over the noise. Dragonite, no holding back. Hurricane. Open a path. Dragonite's wings snapped wide and began to beat, and the sky answered. A whirlwind of tremendous force tore into existence beside its body, blades of compressed air spinning outward in every direction, sweeping up debris and shearing through the formation like something vast and invisible had swung an axe through the center of it. The sound the impact made was immense. Corviknight were hurled upward, spun, and thrown back down. The formation's center collapsed entirely, bodies scattering in every direction, the disciplined structure of the assault dissolving into chaos in seconds. Cries of pain and panic rang out across the sky. The Galar officers stared down at the carnage, faces drained of color. Impossible, what kind of dragon-type beast is that? The remaining Corviknight riders looked at each other, and then down at the solitary figure standing calmly on the ground below. Who was this man? No retreat! A Galar officer bellowed, fighting to hold the formation together. All units, press forward, together. The surviving Corviknight regrouped instinctively, their black bodies pressing together into a dense formation, a falling curtain of iron bearing down on Dragonite all at once. Dragonite, Draco Meteor. Dragonite climbed steeply into the sky, drawing the formation after it. Chase it down. We take that beast in Laver Falls, press forward. The Corviknight army surged upward in pursuit. Dragonite tilted its head back and roared, and the sky answered. The clear blue overhead darkened in an instant, turning a deep, desolate violet, as though something apocalyptic had been pulled down from beyond the clouds. Then the meteors came. Burning projectiles of dragon-type energy screamed down from above in a dense, roaring cascade, striking the Corviknight formation with pinpoint precision. The explosions were deafening. Fire painted the sky red. Corviknight after Corviknight was struck and sent spinning downward, losing consciousness before they hit the ground. The formation didn't break, it disintegrated. What remained of the Galar force lost whatever conviction had been holding them together. Riders yanked their mounts around and fled in every direction, all discipline gone. Running? Lucien's eyes were cold and level. Dragonite, extreme speed. Finish it. Dragonite vanished. An orange afterimage flickered through the retreating formation, there, and there, and there, each pass accompanied by a sharp impact and another Corviknight dropping from the sky. In seconds, it was over. The armored aerial legion that had terrorized the whole of Kalos lay scattered across the ground below the city walls, a handful of badly wounded Corviknight limping away into the distance without looking back. The sky cleared. Sunlight broke through the remaining clouds and fell across the city in long, warm shafts. Silence. On the walls, soldiers stood motionless. In the streets below, civilians stared upward with open mouths. Even Loran had gone completely still. One magical beast. A single magical beast had just dismantled the Corviknight legion that had haunted Kalos's nightmares for over a year. Dragonite descended slowly, wings folding as it landed beside Lucien. Then the city erupted. We won, we actually won. Thank you, Lord Tamer. You saved us. Lord Lucien, you saved Laver City. Loran came down from the wall at a half-run, crossed the distance to Lucien, and dropped to one knee. His voice was thick. Lord Lucien, you saved this city. You saved everyone inside these walls. Loran will carry this debt for the rest of his life. Lucien reached down and helped him to his feet. He was about to speak when a voice arose inside his own mind. Something is watching you. Kiram's voice. Lucien stilled. He turned his head slowly, scanning the area without making it obvious. His eyes found it almost immediately, in an unremarkable patch of grass near the base of the outer wall. A small, cell-like creature, easily overlooked amid the rubble. Zygarde. The order Pokémon of the Kalos region, in one of its cellular forms, had watched the entire battle from beginning to end. It had no physical presence here, only that quiet dragon-type awareness, taking in everything, the armored legion, the Draco Meteor, and a lone trainer from a distant region who had stepped between an attacking army and a city full of frightened civilians without hesitation. Lucien let his gaze move away without reacting. It was simply Zygarde doing what Zygarde did, monitoring the state of the Kalos region, as it always had. A perfectly ordinary cell. He turned back to Loran, who was still red-eyed and upright with effort. No need for formality, Lord Loran. Lucien's voice was calm and direct. I only did what the situation called for. But the Galar army will not accept this defeat quietly. Laver City needs to reinforce its defenses in the coming days, and quickly. Loran straightened and nodded, jaw set. We will follow Lord Lucien's word in everything. Every soldier and civilian in this city, you have only to speak. Around them, the crowd had closed in. Residents pressed forward holding whatever they could spare, bread, berries, water, extending them with both hands, eyes full of gratitude and something close to reverence. Children peered out from behind adults, stealing glances at Dragonite, then at Lucien, their faces caught between awe and shy adoration. Dragonite, for its part, let the battlefield intensity drain quietly away. It turned and pressed its head gently against Lucian's hand. Lucian declined the food with quiet courtesy and spoke to the gathered crowd. Your first priorities are your own people. Reorganize, treat the wounded, and begin repairing the walls. I'll remain in the city for a few days to make sure you're safe. The cheer that followed was enough to shake the remaining dust from the rafters. For the rest of the day, Lucian worked alongside Laurent, directing soldiers and civilians alike in clearing the battlefield, organizing the wounded, and beginning repairs on the most critically damaged sections of the wall. Superior moved rubble and timber with vine whip, handling in minutes what would have taken teams of workers hours. Dragonite ranged wide beyond the city in slow circuits, patrolling a radius of over 10 miles against the possibility of Galar remnants attempting a secondary strike. By sunset, the smoke had mostly cleared. The city walls, patched and standing. The streets, quieter. A fragile, exhausted peace had settled over Lavere. Lucian climbed the wall as the last of the light faded and stood looking out at the darkening horizon. He was not under any illusions about what this day had accomplished. Routing one Corvinite detachment was nothing in the context of the wider war. The Galar invasion was still pushing south. Somewhere in the royal capital, AZ was working, driven by grief, by the death of Floette, by a love that had nowhere left to go except into something terrible. The ultimate weapon was being built. And when it fired, it would not distinguish between soldiers and civilians, between Galar aggressors and the innocent people who had simply been born on the wrong side of a border. One thing still puzzled him, though. In the legends of this era, Calyrex was the king of Galar, a Pokémon of immense wisdom and power, said to have governed the region with care for its people. If Calyrex still held any influence, why had this war been allowed to begin? Had something already happened to it? Chapter 237, AZ in Floette. The Galar region remained largely a mystery to Lucian. Calyrex, the king of wisdom. The legendary Sword and Shield, Zacian and Zamazenta, the two guardian Pokémon whose power had defined Galar's identity for generations. Where were they now? What had happened to them, that a war like this could begin without their intervention? He had no answers yet. As night fell over Lavere City, Lucian and Superior stood together on the city wall, looking out at the horizon as the last of the daylight bled away. The sunset had turned the clouds a deep, burning crimson, the color of something that didn't intend to go out quietly. The night wind moved through the streets below, carrying smoke and the fading echo of the day's cheers, sweeping them away without effort. What it couldn't sweep away was the heaviness that had settled over everyone still living inside these walls. Behind him, the city bore its wounds openly. Civilians in torn clothing sat in doorways. Soldiers with bandaged limbs leaned against crumbling walls. Laurent was speaking in low, grave tones to his subordinates nearby, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who understood exactly what one day's victory did and didn't mean. Everyone here knew. The Corvinite Legion had been routed, yes. But in other parts of Kalos, countless towns and fortresses were still under attack. And in the capital, Lucian's jaw tightened slightly, the capital was in even worse condition. AZ had withdrawn from the world after Floette's death, and without the king, the heart of the kingdom had gone quiet in all the wrong ways. Laurent climbed the wall and came to stand beside him, carrying a bowl of vegetable and meat stew. His expression was apologetic. Lord Lucian, I am sorry. With Lavere's supply lines nearly cut off, this is the best I can offer you. Lucian looked at the bowl, then at the people gathered in the streets below. He shook his head. Give it to someone who needs it more. My lord. Laurent's face softened into a pained smile. I'll remain in Lavere for 3 days, Lucian said. After that, I'll make my way to the capital and see the situation there for myself. Kalos region, western interior, Luminos City. The royal capital. Deep in the night, in the lowest level of the underground royal vaults, a tall figure moved between the shelves of ancient texts, pulling volumes and spreading them open with hands that hadn't rested in days. AZ's eyes were red at the edges, his breathing uneven, his enormous frame bent over the pages with a desperate, consuming focus. On the table beside him lay Floette. Still. The petals that had once trembled with light and color were faded now, their edges curling inward, dry and brittle. The green of the stem had gone gray. Several days earlier, the Galar army had launched a targeted aerial strike on Luminos City, a decapitation attack, swift and brutal. The assault had killed countless civilians before any defense could be organized. Floette had died in the chaos of it. After the first wave of it, the disbelief, the rage, the grief that had no floor, AZ had remembered something. A reference, buried deep in the oldest records kept beneath the royal city. The texts of a civilization that had come before, that had understood things about life and death that the present age had chosen to forget. The life-death conversion device. A machine capable of crossing the boundary between living and dead. Of returning what had been lost, or of taking what still lived and converting it into the energy required to do so. If I had it, Floette could come back. His fingers pressed into the yellowed page, the paper threatening to tear under the pressure. His breathing in the silence of the vault was the only sound. The underground ruins stretched around him in flickering candlelight, the flames guttering in the drafts that moved through the old stone passages. AZ's shadow stretched long and crooked across the frozen wall, a hunched, enormous shape, alone in a space built for a civilization that no longer existed. He looked at Floette. To anyone else, a Pokémon was a Pokémon. Companions came and went. The world was full of them. But Floette had been with him since before he could properly account for his own life. She had been the fixed point around which everything else had turned. And now the iron heels and shrieking armor of Galar's army had simply taken her. Erased her. As though she had been nothing worth accounting for. Every time his eyes moved to her remains, something in the deep part of his chest tore a little further open. The ancient texts spread before him were the only thing keeping him moving. Every character was a thread he could grip. The super-ancient civilization had built this machine and then buried it, sealing it away with warnings that filled page after page, that it violated the natural order, that it would bring catastrophe, that no good could come from wielding power over life and death. AZ had read all of those warnings. He had turned the pages past them without stopping. Just let her come back. He closed the scroll, rose to his feet unsteadily, and stood alone in the vast dark of the underground chamber. In the city above, the aftermath of the Galar strike had settled into an eerie quiet. The army had not stayed, they had pushed on into the interior of Kalos, leaving Luminos isolated, its external communications severed, its civilians living in sustained dread. The nobility gathered daily in private rooms, debating whether to flee. The royal guard patrolled the capital's streets in tight formation, braced for a second assault that had not yet come. And AZ had issued his final instructions to his ministers and stewards, and then stopped attending to the war entirely. He had begun requisitioning equipment, raw materials, every craftsman and scholar remaining in the capital. He worked without sleep, without pause, ignoring the pleas of those around him, ignoring the fear in their faces, ignoring everything that was not the machine taking shape in the darkness below the royal city. The metal framework rose slowly, piece by piece. Ancient crystal was set into the critical joints, cold light pulsing faintly from within each one. And gradually, over days of obsessive, single-minded labor, a structure began to emerge from the underground chamber. Vast, towering, its silhouette not unlike the shape of an eternal flower rendered in steel and crystal and the knowledge of a civilization 3,000 years dead. AZ stood before it. The resurrection device, rebuilt by his own hands, from records that were never meant to be followed. All that remained now was activation. But here, for the first time since Floette's death, AZ hesitated. Because the records were clear on one point that could not be read past or reasoned away. The machine did not run on mechanical power, or elemental energy, or anything that could simply be gathered and fed into it. It ran on the life energy of Pokémon. To resurrect Floette, he would need lives. As many as could be gathered. Your Majesty. The craftsmen and ministers around him spoke with trembling voices. AZ closed his eyes. Held his breath for a long moment. Then opened them. Send the army into the forests surrounding the capital. Round up every wild magical beast you can find and bring them here. Your Majesty, please, you cannot. Anyone who disobeys will be executed. AZ's voice was flat and absolute, his bloodshot eyes moving over the room without seeing any of it. He did not hear the trembling in his subordinates' voices. He did not hear the distant sounds of the city outside. The whole world had narrowed to a single withered shape on a table, and a single sentence that had burned itself into the deepest part of him. Bring her back. The price didn't matter. History's judgment didn't matter. Whatever punishment heaven or earth saw fit to deliver, that didn't matter either. If bringing Floette back meant exhausting every resource Kalos had left, meant bearing eternal condemnation, meant stepping off an edge from which there was no return, he would step. Wait a little longer, he whispered to the still figure on the table, his voice barely carrying in the dark. Very soon. We'll be together again very soon. 3 days passed quickly. During that time, Galar scouts probed the area around Laver City twice, and both times, catching sight of Dragonites circling the perimeter from a distance, turned and withdrew without engaging. The patrols alone had been enough. Inside the city, Laurent had driven recovery with focused, tireless efficiency. Debris cleared. Walls patched and reinforced. A reserve force assembled from soldiers and able-bodied civilians, drilling in rotation from dawn to dusk. Laver City was not whole, it would take far longer than 3 days to be whole, but it was standing. Lucien knew it wasn't enough, in the wider sense. But it was what could be done here. Lord Lucien. Laurent and his men gathered at the gate as word spread of his departure. The city lord's expression carried more feeling than words seemed adequate for. Thank you. For everything. Lucien gave a small nod. He didn't say much. He mounted Dragonite, turned toward the interior of Kalos, and they rose. The wind was constant at this altitude, pressing cold against his face. Below, the landscape moved past in long green stretches, forests, hillsides, the thin lines of roads. Lucien sat upright on Dragonite's back, eyes forward. The royal capital, Lumio City, was already visible on the horizon. But as they drew closer, something changed in the air. It wasn't gunpowder smoke or the aftermath of battle. It was something else, a quality of wrongness, a sensation of something being taken that wasn't meant to be taken. Then he saw it. In the forests and meadows and open fields surrounding the capital, Kalos soldiers moved in teams through every patch of green. Ropes, nets, specially reinforced cages. They swept through the undergrowth in groups, flushing and chasing and cornering with the systematic indifference of men following orders they had stopped thinking about. A fletchling burst upward in a panic of wings, caught immediately in a thrown net, dragged down. A bumblebee bolted for its burrow and was speared out of the entrance, hauled into an iron cage. Even Bidoof, the most docile creatures in any forest, were being seized and shoved into dark transport carts without ceremony. The cries carried upward, helpless sounds of animals that didn't understand what was happening to them. Lucien went still on Dragonite's back. Stop. Dragonite understood. It dropped its altitude and opened its throat, a thunderous roar that rolled across the forest and fields like a physical force, stirring a shockwave of compressed air in every direction. Every soldier in view froze. Tools dropped. Legs buckled. Heads snapped upward to find a colossal Dragonite descending from above, its cold dragon eyes moving across them with an oppressive, crushing weight. The dragon type's intimidate radiated outward and the entire area went silent. Lucien landed cleanly and faced the nearest officer. What is this? The officer's voice was shaky but defiant by instinct. We act under His Majesty's direct orders. These magical beasts are being collected for the royal city. Anyone who interferes. For the royal city. Lucien's gaze moved to the transport carts. Through the bars, eyes looked back at him, small and wide and frightened. He understood immediately. The ultimate weapon needed Pokémon life energy. AZ had ordered the sweep. These animals were going to be fed into the machine. To power the king's device. That's what they're for. The officer's remaining composure cracked. My lord, we don't know the details. We only know that anyone who refuses the order is killed. We had no choice. Around him, the other soldiers had stopped pretending. Some stared at the ground. Some were shaking. None of them looked like men who wanted to be here. Lucian looked at them for a moment. Then he reached for the pokeball at his side. Release all of them. My lord, this is a royal command, we cannot. The pokeball opened. The cold arrived before Kurum was fully visible, a wave of it, instant and absolute, moisture in the air crystallizing into fine ice particles that drifted downward in silence. Then Kurum itself emerged. Vast, glacial blue, its blade-like wings spreading wide, its ancient eyes moving across every soldier present with the unhurried calm of something that had existed long before any of them and would exist long after. The ground whitened beneath it. Frost spread outward from its feet in a slow, silent ring. Roar! The sound was not loud in the way thunder is loud. It was deep, and it moved through the chest rather than the ears, and every person who felt it understood instinctively that there was nothing in this forest that could answer it. The officer's legs folded. He hit the ground and didn't try to get up. The other soldiers were already moving, not fleeing, but scrambling for the cages, hands working frantically at the locks, prying iron bars open with whatever they had available. Cages swung wide one after another. Fletchling. Bunnelby. Bidoof. A skiddo. A gogoat foal. Each one paused for a fraction of a second at the open door, some glancing back at Lucian and Kurum with wide, uncertain eyes, and then ran. Into the undergrowth, into the treeline, gone. In moments, the carts were empty. Lucian recalled Kurum and turned his gaze toward the capital. He didn't look back at the soldiers. In a patch of undergrowth nearby, a small green Zygarde cell watched in silence as the last Pokémon disappeared into the forest. And far away, in two very different places, two ancient beings raised their heads at the same moment. In the depths of a forest where the light fell green and deep through centuries-old branches, a creature like a great stag lifted its head from still water. 8 branching antlers, dark green shading to black, caught the filtered light. Its eyes, ancient and alert, fixed on a direction. In a barren valley where nothing grew and the air itself seemed reluctant to move, a massive bird-shaped Pokémon with deep crimson wings stirred from stillness, its head turning toward the same point on the horizon. Xerneas. Yveltal. Both of them left their places and began to move. Chapter 238, Choice. My lord, a massive creature is descending on the city. Is it the enemy? Throughout Lumiose City, soldiers and civilians alike looked up at the enormous figure dropping from the sky, their faces rigid with fear. Lucian descended slowly into the city astride Kurum. The reports Columbus had brought back had described Lumiose as a grand and prosperous capital, but what lay below him now bore little resemblance to that description. The marks of the recent Galar assault were everywhere. Scorched stone, desolate ruins in what had once been busy districts, dark stains on the cobblestones that hadn't yet been fully cleaned away. As Kurum settled to the ground, a night order closed in around them almost immediately, armored soldiers, weapons raised, faces pale but holding their positions out of disciplined fear rather than confidence. Lucian let his gaze move over them. I am Lucian, king of the Unova kingdom, from the Unova region to the east. I have not come with hostile intent. I am here to speak with your king on a matter of great importance. A ripple moved through the assembled soldiers. Murmurs broke out. Unova Kingdom? Wasn't that the fleet that arrived a few months ago? From the Far East, they said. The leading knight stepped forward, spear still raised, his killing intent dialed back but not gone. If you are indeed a guest of the Unova Kingdom, why have you brought a monster of this size into the city? Lumiose has only just survived an assault. The people are terrified. If you cause further panic, the consequences. If I had come to attack, Lucian said quietly, Kurum's power would have leveled this city before anyone had time to react. As if to punctuate the statement, a faint chill radiated from Kurum's body. The ground around its feet whitened with a thin layer of frost. Every soldier in the square took half a step back without consciously deciding to. I am here to fight alongside Kalos against Galar, Lucian continued, his voice carrying the particular weight of someone who meant precisely what they said. Every moment we delay, the war moves closer to these walls. Take me to your king. I have something important to tell him. The Knight Commander's expression went through several changes in quick succession. Finally, slowly, he lowered his spear. Please wait here, my lord. I will inform His Majesty at once. He turned and broke into a run toward the depths of the palace, pushing past guards who tried to stop him without breaking stride. Lumiose City held its breath. The square went utterly silent, soldiers standing at attention, not one of them willing to make a sound, Kurum's ice-blue form radiating cold stillness at the center of it all. Before long, hurried footsteps returned from the direction of the palace. My lord, His Majesty will see you. Lucian nodded and recalled Kurum into its pokeball. The collective exhale from the surrounding soldiers was almost audible. He followed the knight through the palace corridors, and there, at the far end of a vast and dimly lit hall, he saw him. A.Z. The man was enormous, tall in a way that seemed to belong to a different scale than ordinary people. His royal robes were dusty and unkempt, his long hair falling loose over his shoulders. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying but from days without sleep, and the grief that surrounded him was not the soft kind. It was the hard, immovable kind, the kind that had already made its decisions and was simply waiting for the means to act on them. His gaze fell on Lucian and stayed there. King of Unova. His voice was low and rough. What brings you to Kalos? I know a way to bring Floette back to life. The words were simple and direct. Lucian had chosen them deliberately. There was no gentle approach to a man in AZ's condition, and he wasn't going to waste time finding one. He needed to give AZ another path before the one he was already walking reached its end. He understood, with complete clarity, why AZ had made the choices he had. If their positions were reversed, if it were Dragonite, or Superior, or Volcarona lying still on that table, Lucian knew with uncomfortable honesty that he would not be certain of making a different choice. That was precisely why he couldn't simply try to stop AZ. He had to offer him something else. AZ's eyes narrowed slowly. How do you know about this? That doesn't matter right now. What matters is that the path you're currently on will cost the lives of innocent beasts who have nothing to do with this war. I'm offering you a different way, one without that cost. What way? There is a magical beast in the Kalos region called Xerneas. The god of life. It possesses the power to resurrect the dead, truly resurrect, with all memories and emotions intact. Find Xerneas, and Floette can come back to you whole. Silence. AZ stared at him from the throne. In those crimson eyes, something moved, despair, then a flare of something fragile and fierce, like a flame in a cracked lantern. Then he laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the laughter of a man whose grief had curdled into something jagged, and it shook dust from the rafters. Xerneas. He slammed his hand down on the armrest. The impact rang through the hall. You come here, to my city, and offer me a legend? His voice cracked on the last word, rising into something raw. Where was your god of life when Galar's army marched through my streets? Where was he when my Floette? He stopped. Forced himself to continue. If gods exist, tell me why they stood aside and watched. He rose from the throne, his enormous frame unsteady, his robe slipping from one shoulder. You want me to wait for a god that has never once appeared when it was needed? And in the meantime, I should do nothing? Lucian waited until AZ had finished. Then he spoke, slowly and clearly, each word placed with care. Whether you believe it or not, Xerneas exists. And Xerneas alone can bring Floette back the way you actually want her back. Not as something salvaged from death. Truly alive, with everything she was before. The hall went still. AZ's body stilled with it. The wildness in his eyes receded, slowly, replaced by something far more complicated, fear and longing and the desperate, fragile shape of a man who wanted to believe something and was terrified of what it would mean if he did. Your Majesty AZ. Lucian's voice was quiet and final. You have two paths before you. If you choose to sacrifice the lives of innocent magical beasts to activate the ultimate weapon, I will stop you. I want you to understand that clearly. But if you choose to trust me and seek Xerneas, I will stand beside you every step of the way. The silence that followed was long. Az sank back slowly. His eyes closed. When the tears came, he didn't try to stop them, they ran down the deep lines of his face and fell without sound onto the stone floor. A long time passed. Then he opened his eyes, and looked at Lucian with an expression that had moved past grief into something quieter and more exhausted. The last time your fleet came here, that captain, Columbus, told me a great deal about you. His voice was hoarse but steady. That you earned the trust of a god dragon. That you ended a war with your own hands and unified your region. That you built a nation where people and magical beasts live as one. He paused. You have magical beast companions of your own. If you were in my position, if they were the ones who had been taken from you, what would you do? Lucian was quiet for a moment. I wouldn't let that happen, he said. Az looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, something in his face settled. Good. His voice was rough and quiet and entirely certain. I'll trust you. Once. He straightened in the throne, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a king's word, however worn down by grief that king had become. Kalos will ally with the Unova kingdom. Galar's ambitions, we will face them together. And Floette's resurrection, I will entrust that to you as well. We fight together. Az's eyes hardened suddenly, a cold and dangerous light entering them. But understand this, if you deceive me, I will bring all of Kalos down around you and take you with it. Lucian kept his expression steady. At which point the ultimate weapons blast would presumably reach the Unova region as well. Az, Lucian, swear it here. His voice carried through the dim and ancient hall, clear and unhurried. I will return Floette to you. And I will stand with you to protect Kalos's peace. Outside the tall windows, the darkness had deepened fully. The mist pressed against the glass. A covenant that would change the fate of the Kalos region had been made. Late that night, Lucian rested in the chambers Az's staff had prepared for him. His Pokémon settled around him quietly. He sat by the window, looking out at the fog-covered sky, and let out a slow, slightly rueful breath. Should he have involved himself in the conflict between Kalos and Galar at all? The answer, when he examined it honestly, was never really in doubt. He couldn't stand by and watch innocent Pokémon be consumed by the ultimate weapon, millions of living things sacrificed for the resurrection of one, however beloved. That kind of equation didn't balance, no matter how you tried to make it work. And yet he understood Az. That was the uncomfortable part. Perhaps that was exactly why Floette, after being resurrected by the weapon in the original timeline, had chosen to leave. Not because Az hadn't loved her, but because of what that love had cost everyone else. He pushed the thought aside and focused on the immediate problem. Xerneas. Where are you? Zygarde would know. Zygarde was the ecological overseer of the Kalos region, the silent warden that monitored every corner of this land, maintaining its balance. Az's actions, if allowed to proceed, would tear that balance apart beyond recovery. Which meant Zygarde had every reason to cooperate. Kiram, Lucian said quietly. Can you locate that green Pokémon from earlier today? Kiram's response came immediately, settling into his thoughts without words. It's outside. Lucian rose and followed Kiram's awareness out through the corridors and into the castle grounds, where he found it quickly, a faintly luminous green cell nestled in an unremarkable flowerbed near the outer wall. Small enough to overlook entirely. But Lucian knew what it was. Zygarde's cells were scattered throughout every corner of Kalos, each one a node in a vast sensory network, feeding everything it witnessed back to the whole. He cupped the cell gently in both hands and carried it back to his room. He sat cross-legged on the floor, the softly glowing cell resting in his open palm, and took a moment to simply look at it. Then he spoke. I know it's you, Zygarde. His voice was quiet. The cell didn't move. The Kalos region is facing a threat serious enough to destabilize the entire world's ecological order. The king of this nation has lost his most important companion, and in his grief, he intends to activate a weapon that would drain the life force from millions of Pokémon, sacrificing them to reverse death itself. If that happens, this land will be hollowed out. The Pokémon living here may never recover. He paused. I don't think that's an outcome you're willing to accept. The cell flickered faintly. Lucian continued. I have made a pact with AZ. No ultimate weapon. No innocent lives sacrificed. Instead, we find Xerneas, the god of life, and use the pure power of life itself to bring Floette back. Properly. Completely. He let that sit for a moment. After Floette is restored and the invaders are driven out, I will work with AZ to build something new here, a Kalos where humans and Pokémon live together as they should. Where the land is protected, not consumed. But to do any of that, I need your help. Tell me where Xerneas is sleeping, and I give you my word, I will do everything in my power to preserve the ecological balance of this region. I will help you protect what this land is supposed to be. The room went silent. Outside, the night breeze moved softly past the window. Moonlight broke through the cloud cover and fell across his palm, and the small cell resting within it. Then it came, not in words. A vast, ancient, entirely impersonal consciousness flowing into his awareness like deep water finding its level. Images. A tree. Enormous, ancient, its canopy spreading over a sea of flowers that stretched in every direction, colors too vivid to be entirely real. The light there was different, softer, older. And within the blossoms, resting in the form of a great tree, perfectly still and perfectly at peace, Xerneas slept. Lucian closed his eyes and held the image until he was certain he had everything he needed. When he opened them again, his expression was settled and resolved. Zygarde had agreed. I understand. He extended his hand slightly, and the cell raised itself, a small, deliberate movement, unmistakably a gesture of acknowledgement. Then it dissolved into a faint thread of light that drifted out through the window and disappeared into the dark of the Kalos night. Far away, deep within a cave system, Zygarde's primary form, vast and serpentine, opened its eyes in the dark. Its gaze fixed on the distance, still and measuring. The answer to the question of Xerneas' location was one Zygarde had chosen not to withhold, not because the creature from the distant region had asked for it, but because events had already been set in motion that made concealment pointless. Kyurem's appearance over Kalos had sent a resonance through the region's entire ecological field, a power unlike anything native to this land, ancient and absolute. That resonance had already reached Xerneas and Yveltal alike, stirring something in both of them that recognition alone couldn't fully explain. They were already moving. Not toward Lumiose City. Toward the source. Zygarde watched through 100 scattered cells as the two most fundamental forces in the Kalos region converged on a single point, drawn there not by any summons, but by the simple fact of Kyurem's existence. A dragon of that order, in their territory. They were coming to see for themselves what had arrived on their land. Chapter 239, Life and Death. In the depths of the Lumiose City Royal Palace, the faint green light faded from Lucian's palm. Zygarde's cell had withdrawn. He let out a slow breath. Good. A line of communication with the third great Pokémon of Kalos had been established. He stood and looked out the window. Night had settled fully over the city. Perhaps because of the recent assault, Lumiose was completely silent. Soldiers moved along the outer walls with torches, their small lights tracing slow arcs through the dark. Every civilian window was shut tight, no sound escaping from within. Looking at it, Lucian felt an unexpected pang of something close to homesickness. Lucian's city at night was nothing like this. The streets there were bright, the taverns and restaurants open at all hours, Pokémon moving through the city alongside people as naturally as breathing. Everything there felt alive, even in the small hours. He shook his head and turned away from the window. No point in that line of thinking. He washed his face, lay down, and let sleep take him. He didn't know how long he slept before the roar woke him. It was deafening and close, and it brought him to his feet before he was fully conscious. He crossed to the window in 2 steps. Boom! A violent impact had struck the northern city wall. Dust billowed up in a thick cloud, and a section of the already weakened stonework had cracked open entirely, leaving a jagged gap in the fortifications. An alarm split the night air immediately after, its sound cutting across the entire city. Enemy attack. The Galar army. They're at the gates. Why now, of all times? The voices of soldiers carried up from below, ragged with fear. Along the walls, the hoarse cries of guards competed with the rising roar of flames spreading along the horizon. Armored Galar soldiers surged forward in a tide, and behind them came enormous Pokémon, their heavy stone-like bodies sending tremors through the ground with every step. Light, fire, and rubble churned together in the night sky as the full Galar vanguard pressed its assault under cover of darkness. In the corridor outside, the palace guards arrived at a run, dropping to one knee, their faces drained of color. Your Majesty! The North Gate has been breached. Galar's main force is pushing through. AZ went rigid. The fragile calm that had settled in his eyes during his conversation with Lucian burned away in an instant, replaced by a cold and towering fury. His fists clenched until his knuckles went white. Galar! His voice was barely controlled. At this moment, of all moments, they choose this. Outside, the sounds of fighting closed in steadily. Civilian cries, Pokémon growls, the crash of structures giving way. Lumio City's defenses had already been stretched thin before tonight. Against a planned, coordinated assault of this scale, the walls would not hold. A minister looked upward through the high window, his face blank with dread. The clear moonlight had been blotted out entirely. The sky was black with wings. Your Majesty, the Corvinite Air Corps. They're attacking from above as well. A knight dropped to his knee, his voice cracking. Your Majesty, please withdraw. We will hold them as long as we can. AZ let out a short, bitter sound that wasn't quite a laugh. The wildness had returned to his eyes. Withdraw. He turned the word over as though it belonged to a language he no longer spoke. My city is here. My people are here. My Floette is here. Where exactly would I withdraw to? Throughout Lumio City, civilians had pressed themselves into corners, into cellars, into the spaces beneath stairwells, clutching each other in silence while the sounds of the assault rolled over them like a flood. A small girl in a rough cloth dress looked up at her mother, her eyes wide and lost. Mother, what do we do? The woman's eyes were clouded. She had no answer. The enemy had reached the capital itself. There was nothing left to do. She pulled her daughter tightly against her chest. Don't be afraid. His Majesty AZ will drive them back. On the street nearby, a Kalos man froze as a Galar soldier stepped in front of him, weapon raised and already stained dark. The man's legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed to his knees, begging. The soldier grinned and swung without hesitation. Forward! Take the Kalos capital tonight. The promise of rank and reward had turned these men into something else entirely. They poured through the breached gates like water through broken stone. The west gate is lost. The cry came from somewhere in the dark, followed by the sound of something heavy collapsing. The west gate of Lumio City had fallen. Kalos soldiers stood where they were and stared at nothing, the last of their resistance leaving them. Then the cold arrived. It came without warning, a sudden drop in temperature that swept across the palace square and outward. A vast ice-blue shape descended from above, wings spreading wide, radiating a chill that turned breath to vapor and quenched the nearest flames in an instant. The noise of battle faltered across the entire city, swallowed by the dragon-type pressure radiating outward in every direction. Kiram had entered the battlefield. Every face in Lumio City turned upward. Kiram beat its wings and climbed, the ice dragon tearing through the smoke-filled night sky, moving toward the breaches in the walls. Wherever it passed, the air crystallized. Flames died. Debris froze mid-fall, hanging suspended in clear ice before shattering on the ground below. The Galar general stared up at it from outside the walls, went pale, and then forced a laugh. It's just a monster. All units, attack. Bring it down. Thousands of Pokémon unleashed simultaneously. Flames, lightning, boulders, beams of energy converged on Kyurem from every direction. Kyurem exhaled. The attacks froze in the air. Every flame, every bolt, every projectile crystallized and held for a single suspended moment, and then fell as a cascade of ice shards onto the charging force below. The vanguard of the assault stopped moving. Soldiers and Pokémon alike stood fixed in place, encased in ice, a frozen tableau spread across the ground outside the gates. The battlefield went silent for 1 full second. Then the Galar lines broke. What is that thing? A legendary beast. We can't fight a legendary monster. Soldiers turned and ran. The organized assault dissolved into individual men fleeing in every direction, their formations meaningless. High above the city, something else was changing in the sky. On one side of the horizon, a spreading radiance of 7 colors bloomed slowly outward, soft and alive with the particular quality of something ancient waking from sleep. On the other side, a deep crimson shadow condensed against the dark, dense, and still and carrying the particular cold of absolute finality. 2 presences. Vast and opposing. Moving from opposite ends of Kalos toward the same point. Xerneas and Yveltal arrived almost together. They did not enter the city. They held at a distance, 2 enormous shapes at the edge of the firelight, watching. The war between humans below. The breached walls, the fleeing soldiers, the frozen vanguard on the ground. And above it all, Kyurem, hovering over Lumiose City in the dark, alone against an army, its ice-blue eyes moving across the land below with complete and unhurried calm. They watched, and they did not intervene. Kyurem did not acknowledge them. It simply continued what it was doing. The Corviknight Air Corps, which had been holding formation overhead, received their orders in dove. Hundreds of armored bodies dropped in a single mass toward Kyurem, filling the sky from above like a collapsing ceiling. Deep beneath the palace, in the secret chamber where the ultimate weapon stood, AZ had not moved. He stood before the machine in silence. The sounds of the battle above filtered down through the stone, each impact, each cry, each collapsing wall reaching him as though from a great distance. The weapon's metallic frame caught the dim light and held it, cold and patient, its lines glowing faintly crimson in the dark. AZ's eyes had gone somewhere far away. It was over. All of it. Tonight, his city, his people, everything he had tried to hold together would be taken by Galar. He had not been able to defend the walls. He had not been able to protect his people. He had not been able to save Floette. He had believed Lucien. He had, for a brief and fragile moment, allowed himself to believe that there was another way. But Galar's forces were inside the gates now, and the fires were spreading toward the palace, and the sounds outside did not lie. "It's too late," AZ whispered. His voice was hoarse and barely audible, and the tears that ran down his face left pale tracks through the dust on his skin. Slowly, his hand rose. His fingertips were trembling. He reached for the ultimate weapon's activation core. One touch, and the Galar army would be reduced to nothing. Kalos would be safe. The price? There was no price worth considering. An army that had done this to his city and his people had forfeited any claim to mercy. A man who had already lost everything had no right to hesitate. The despair had burned away completely, replaced by something colder and more absolute. AZ's face twisted, and a dark aura radiated from him in waves. He would stand and fall with Lumiose City. His hand came down hard on the activation core. The ground shook. Deep beneath the palace, the weapon's awakening sent a tremor through the earth that traveled up through the walls and into every stone of the castle above. Brilliant white lines ignited across the machine's frame at terrifying speed, and the chamber was swallowed by a searing, blinding light. An all-consuming force erupted from the core. Like something dropped from above onto the earth, a white hemispherical wave of light rose from the ground and expanded outward in every direction, turning the night sky as bright as noon. What is that? Inside the city, soldiers and civilians alike looked up with expressions of pure terror. Lucien saw it from above and felt his stomach drop. The ultimate weapon. AZ had activated it. Wherever the white sphere advanced, something invisible reached into the living things nearest to it and pulled. Life force, drawn out of civilians, soldiers, Pokémon, without discrimination, without mercy, rushing inward toward the weapon. It did not distinguish between Kalos and Galar. It did not distinguish between friend and enemy. It simply consumed. Lucian's expression hardened. His gaze swept across the civilians and Pokémon below, frozen in helpless terror as the light crept toward them. He gritted his teeth. Kyurem, glaciate. Slow that sphere down. The ancient cold that erupted from Kyurem's body was immense, a rushing tide of ice that engulfed the white sphere almost instantly. But the ultimate weapon's power was not simply a force that could be overpowered. It was a platform, an indiscriminate absorption engine, and the moment Kyurem's energy touched the white light, it began drawing that in as well. It's absorbing Kyurem's energy directly. Lucian's jaw tightened. The one thing worth noting was that the freezing effect had slowed the sphere's expansion considerably. But slowing it was not stopping it. To truly halt it, the weapon would need to be fed enough energy to reach saturation. There was no other way to shut it down. Everyone, get out of the city now. Move away from the walls. He reached into his coat and released the remaining Pokeballs in quick succession. Dragonite, Volcarona, and Superior materialized in the air around him, their faces immediately registering the wrongness of the white light below. Dragonite, help! Get the civilians and Pokémon out of the city. Dragonite glanced at him once, worry plain across its face, then dove without hesitation. I'm staying to stop it, Lucian said, quietly enough that only his Pokémon heard. In the streets below, the people of Lumio City looked up at Kyurem and Lucian above them, tears running freely down their faces. They had just watched people disappear. Civilians, soldiers, Pokémon, their one moment and simply gone the next, drawn into the light without a sound. Please hurry. The Kalos garrison had finally broken through its paralysis and was pushing civilians toward the outer gates, organizing what retreat it could. The evacuation was desperate and disorganized, but it was moving. High above the chaos, the Galar general watched the white sphere with wide eyes, and then smiled. The Corviknight Corps had just been routed. His army had suffered a blow unlike anything it had faced before. But this white light, whatever it was, that was opportunity. Let it exhaust itself against the Pokémon. Let it do the work for them. All ground forces, begin your withdrawal. Air units, listen to me carefully. While that creature is occupied, hit it with everything you have, then pull back immediately. Lucian, still riding Kyurem, watched this unfold and felt a cold fury settle over him. From this day forward, the Galar royal family had made themselves his problem. Outside the walls, at a distance far enough to observe without being caught in the sphere's reach, Xerneas and Yveltal had stopped moving. The moment the white light had appeared, both of them had gone very still. Because they understood, in the way that beings of their nature understand things, exactly what would happen if that wave of energy was allowed to continue expanding unchecked. Buildings dissolved. Earth cracked dry and barren. Life simply ended, grass and stone and living creature alike, stripped to nothing as the light passed through. Soldier and civilian. Pokémon and person. The Galar army. Every living thing within reach. All of it, consumed without distinction. The two legendary Pokémon looked at each other. And then they looked again at the figure riding the ice-blue dragon above the stricken city, throwing himself between the weapon's light and the people below it. Not an invader. Not a conqueror. Something else entirely. They moved at the same moment. Two streaks of light, one the deep blue of living things and one the deep red of their ending, shot over the walls and came to rest beside Kyurem. Their bodies blazed with power as they turned the full force of their presence against the white sphere, pouring energy into it from either side. Lucian stared at them. Xerneas. Yveltal. He recovered quickly. They had felt what was happening and come on their own. They understood what was at stake. Kyurem, protect them. Kyurem climbed instantly, cold erupting from its body in a wave that swept the Corviknight Corps from the sky. The armored birds and their riders froze mid-dive, becoming ice sculptures that fell and shattered on the ground below. Lucian drove Kurum straight toward the Galar forces massed outside the walls, and in one sweep, the army's advance was encased in frost. He turned back. The white sphere had stopped expanding. Xerneas and Yveltal had given it enough. At the same moment, deep within the palace chamber, in the light of the ultimate weapon, something moved. The still figure of Floette slowly opened her eyes. AZ did not see it. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on the machine, on the energy readings climbing toward their peak. A terrible smile crossed his face. Galar. This is for everything you have done. He activated the weapon's release. The energy that had been gathered and compressed within the ultimate weapon's core erupted in a single column of white light that punched through the earth, through the palace walls, through the sky above, turning the darkness of the night into blazing noon in a single second. The beam climbed past the clouds and kept going. In the streets of Lumio City, everyone who had not yet evacuated looked up. Outside the walls, the soldiers who had fled looked up. Lucian looked up. The beam reached its apex, and then changed direction. It bent, impossibly fast, and accelerated away on a trajectory no eye could follow. Lucian already knew where it was going. Galar. Across the ocean, thousands of miles away. The ultimate weapon of the superancient civilization, the most destructive force this era had ever seen, was crossing the world to strike the Galar region with everything it had gathered. Chapter 240, The Storm That Followed. In the depths of the horizon, a blinding column of white light streaked across the sky like a comet, moving at a speed that made the eye refuse to follow it. In the instant it passed over the sea, the water surface seemed to freeze under the pressure of its wake. The air around it warped with heat, and the distant coastline shimmered and distorted in visible waves. Galar region. The royal palace. The king stood on the observation platform, a satisfied smile on his face. His army was on the verge of taking Kalos. This was the first step in the Galar royal family's domination of the entire world. Your Majesty, congratulations. A courtier bowed deeply. Your greatness will be spoken of for thousands of years. The king smiled. Around him, members of the royal family exchanged pleased looks, already beginning to celebrate. The cheers died before they fully formed. The sky turned white. From thousands of miles away, a beam of light whiter than anything the king had ever seen came down on them vertically, without warning, without sound, filling the entire sky above the royal city in a single instant. The king tilted his head back. His smile was still on his face. Then it froze there. There was no time for anything else. Only a single moment of absolute silence, and then the earth beneath the royal city began to shake as though something immeasurably large had woken in its foundations. Rubble exploded outward in every direction. The sky blazed milky white. A wave of energy expanded at the speed of light across the entire city. People in the streets were vaporized before they could take a step. Granite buildings dissolved on contact with the light, flowing away as rivers of molten stone. The great golden statue atop the palace tower, the symbol of the Galar royal family's glory, was gone before it could make a sound. Reduced to nothing. This was the ultimate weapon at full release. The energy it had gathered from legendary Pokémon, from the life force of everything around it, now unleashed itself entirely in a single direction. Across the ocean, across every mountain and sea between here and there, a civilization's grief-given catastrophic form arrived at its destination. The Corvinite Air Corps, still retreating outside the Galar capital, never made it. The aftershock of the impact caught them before they cleared the city's edge. Thousands of black feathers ignited simultaneously, a burning rain that fell through the vaporized air as the Galar kingdom's proudest weapon was erased in a single breath. Inside the palace throne room, the Galar general who had been imagining his own victory sat slumped beneath the throne. He watched the white light consume his army. Watched it swallow the royal city. Watched the distant sea itself vaporize into a towering cloud of white mist. The earth shook in space bent, and the beam detonated deep within Galar's interior with a concussion that overturned mountain ranges and swept the coastline clean. The shockwave expanded outward in all directions. The royal family turned and ran. The light arrived before any of them had taken 3 steps. For 3 full days afterward, a pall of dust and ash hung over the Galar region, blotting out the sun and moon entirely. Above Lumiose City, Lucian held Curum still in the air and looked down at the city below. The battle was over. The Galar assault had collapsed entirely at some point during the chaos, the surviving soldiers fleeing in every direction. What remained in the streets was the aftermath. Cracked earth where the ultimate weapons absorption had been strongest, vegetation blackened and withered, the smell of smoke and ash thick in the air. The damage was real and it was serious. But Curum, Xerneas, and Yveltal had contained it in time. The worst of the weapons force had been confined to the area around the palace, rather than spreading outward across the whole city as the original historical record had described. The people in Pokémon who had been evacuated were alive. Those who hadn't made it out in time had survived as well, by margins that should not have been possible. Lucian let out a long, slow breath. Outside the city walls, tens of thousands of Kalos soldiers and hundreds of thousands of civilians stood in silence, looking back at the ruined capital with hollow, uncomprehending expressions. They should not have survived tonight. By any reasonable calculation, they should not have survived. They were alive. On the roof of the ruined palace, Az stood motionless among the rubble, his clothes torn, blood on his hands. He watched the last trace of the white beam fade into the distance, and the madness that had been in his eyes burned out, leaving behind something emptier and quieter than grief. Beside him, Floette floated in the air, newly alive, emitting a soft, warm light that moved gently across the wounds on his body. Az reached out and touched her. His hand shook. "You're here," he whispered. His voice was barely audible, rough and worn through. "Floette. You're alive." Floette's light pulsed softly. But her eyes, as they looked at him, carried something complicated in them. She turned her gaze outward, across the ruined city, across everything the night had cost. Lucian watched from above and said nothing. He felt the weight of it clearly. Az had not known that another path was still available. When the Galar assault had broken the gates and the fires had reached the palace walls, he had done what a desperate and grieving man with ultimate power at his fingertips does. Lucian had not anticipated how quickly the army would move, had not gotten to Az in time to hold him back. But the damage had been contained. That was what mattered now. On either side of Curum, Xerneas and Yveltal stood in silence. The god of life and the god of death, their presences as different as light and shadow, looked out over the landscape that was already beginning, slowly, to breathe again. Then they turned. They looked at Curum, and at the human beside it, for a long moment. Without a word, both of them gave a small, unhurried nod. Then they turned and left, fading back into the darkness of Kalos. 3 days later, Lumiose City was already rebuilding. The houses were in ruins, but the people were alive, and life moved forward regardless. The dead were buried. Fires were cleared. Hands that had been shaking the night before were now carrying timber and stone. Report. The remaining Galar forces have completely withdrawn from the Kalos region. A guard came in at a run, face bright with relief. Word is that something catastrophic struck the Galar region itself. It must have been the weapon that hit them. The reaction in the hall was immediate. Good. Those invaders deserve everything they got. After what they did to our people. Let them feel what we felt. The ministers of Kalos voiced their feelings without restraint, the months of accumulated grief and fury finding an outlet at last. As an outsider, Lucian had not participated in the battle directly. He had only done what he could to limit the damage. And yet, sitting in the aftermath of it, he found himself thinking. If he had been in Az's position, his country invaded, his people dying under enemy swords, his most beloved companion gone, what would he have done? He was not certain he would have chosen differently. On the throne, Az sat with his eyes closed, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent everything they had and then spent more. When he eventually learned from his ministers the full account of what Lucian had done during the battle, something shifted in his expression. He had come very close to destroying everything. Without the intervention from Unova, the ultimate weapons absorption wave would have consumed the life of every living thing within its reach. He had nearly done to his own people what Galar had done. He had no right to remain on the throne. Az rose slowly. His footsteps on the stone floor were heavy, each one deliberate, carrying the weight of what he had nearly caused. He did not look at the agitated ministers around him, nor at the soldiers still celebrating in the corridor outside. He walked directly to Lucian and knelt on one knee. It was not a gesture of ceremony. It was something older and more personal than that. A fallen king acknowledging the man who had stood between his grief and its consequences. Your Majesty Lucian. Az's voice was low and stripped of everything except what was left when everything else had been burned away. Kalos owes you a debt that cannot be properly repaid. And I, Az, owe you the world itself. Lucian was quiet for a moment. Then he reached down and helped him to his feet. This is your country. I only did what the situation required. As the words settled, a soft light entered through the open palace window. Floette drifted down and came to rest in Az's open palm, her petals trembling with a gentle, steady warmth, as though comforting him without words. Az looked at her, the companion he had lost and then found again through methods he could not be proud of, and his eyes filled with tears. He had nearly lost his kingdom, his capital, and countless of his people. In the end, he had found the one thing he had been trying to protect all along. He raised his head. I am not fit to be king. His voice was quiet but entirely resolved. From today, I abdicate the Kalos throne. For the rest of my life, I will walk this broken land and use the power of the eternal flower to heal what the war has left behind. The ministers reacted immediately, voices overlapping in protest. Az raised one hand and they stopped. There is nothing more to discuss. This is the only repayment I am capable of making. He turned to the window. Outside, the people of Lumio City were already at work, clearing debris, carrying stone, beginning again. The smoke had cleared enough for sunlight to reach the cracked earth. Everywhere there was ruin, and everywhere within that ruin, life was finding its way back to the surface. Lucian watched the scene and felt something stir in his chest. He thought, briefly, of Lucian City. The lit streets at night, the Pokémon moving through the market crowds, the sound of people going about ordinary lives. The people of Kalos, given time and the right foundations, could have that too. I have a suggestion, he said. Something I can help with, to the best of my ability. Everyone in the hall turned to look at him. Rest first. Recover your strength. But when you are ready to rebuild, consider a different approach. He paused, then continued. In Unova, not long ago, the common people lived the way Kalos lives now. Ravaged by conflict, not enough to eat or wear, people dying every winter from cold and hunger. That was the reality for years. But that path was wrong, and we looked for a different one. Now, every commoner in the Unova kingdom eats well and stays warm. Even in the coldest months, no one starves. Everyone has food, a home, farmland, and clothes on their back. The room went still. Then the exclamations broke out. That is impossible. No king could feed an entire nation's population. Even a god couldn't manage it. This was not simple skepticism. With the productive capacity of serfs and the inefficiency of manor-based agriculture, what Lucian was describing genuinely could not be done by conventional means. Everyone in the room understood that. Lucian smiled. We learned to work alongside Pokémon. He let that sit for a moment before continuing. In Unova, we call the magical beasts Pokémon, and every person can form a partnership with one. Pokémon that produce fire help with cooking and forging. Pokémon that control water assist with irrigation and daily work. And beyond that, there are Pokémon suited to farming, to construction, to mining, to transportation. Everything I described, the food, the warmth, the stability, came from building a world where people and Pokémon work together as partners rather than as owner and tool. His voice faded. The hall was completely silent. Then an elderly minister with a white beard looked at him as though he were seeing something that should not exist. The old minister let out a sharp breath. Working alongside magical beasts? That is not possible. Wild Pokémon are ferocious. They attack any human on sight. With the right approach, nothing is impossible, Lucian said. Consider the Galar Kingdom's Corviknight core. Was that not also borrowing the power of Pokémon? He let that land, then let his gaze move to Floette, still resting quietly in AZ's palm. And Floette is also a Pokémon. Yet she gave her life to protect AZ. The hall went completely silent. Even the air seemed to hold itself still for a moment. Floette trembled gently in AZ's palm, her petals glowing with a soft, steady light. The people around the room stared at her, and the realization moved through them one by one. The most precious guardian in their king's life, the being whose loss had nearly destroyed a nation, was one of the creatures they had spent their entire lives calling wild beasts. Lucian looked around the room. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but it carried. Pokémon are not wild beasts. They are not weapons. They are, like us, part of this world. They exist alongside humanity as equals, not beneath it. He raised his hand, and the Pokeballs at his side opened one after another. Dragonite, Volcarona, and Superior materialized beside him without drama, without threat, and simply stood there. 3 powerful Pokémon, perfectly still, watching the room with calm and intelligent eyes. They are gentle, loyal, and capable of far more than fighting. Unova's prosperity did not come from divine favor. It came from choosing to work together. The ministers exchanged glances, their shock gradually giving way to something deeper and less certain than simple disbelief. For generations, humanity's understanding of Pokémon had been fixed around 2 ideas: threat and combat potential. People had positioned themselves as the dominant force of the world, and some had used that belief to enslave and crush Pokémon without hesitation. What was standing in front of them now did not fit that understanding at all. AZ looked at the 3 Pokémon behind Lucian, his gaze complex and still. He thought of Floette, the day she had given everything to protect him and the people of Kalos. He had understood something in that moment that he had never quite been able to put into words, that some Pokémon understood loyalty and sacrifice more deeply than most humans ever would. Unova actually achieved this, an elderly official asked, his voice unsteady. Truly? Several years of results confirm it, Lucian said. When humans and Pokémon live as partners rather than as master and servant, the land becomes more productive and peace lasts longer. That is not idealism. That is simply what happened in Unova. He looked at AZ directly. Kalos has been devastated. The road to rebuilding will be long. But if you can use this moment to break free from the old way of thinking, you have the chance to build something genuinely new. As an ally, I am willing to represent Unova in helping you find that path. A senior official glanced between AZ and Lucian, a careful expression on his face. May I ask what Unova gains from helping Kalos in this way? Lucian smiled slightly. I want to build a world where humans and Pokémon live and travel together as one. That is my goal, and it is something I once promised Kyurem. Kalos recovering well serves that goal. It is as simple as that. The room was quiet for a long moment. AZ lowered his head and looked at Floette in his palm. The eternal flower pressed softly against his fingertips, as though giving him a small, wordless answer. He raised his head. His eyes were tired, but the resolution in them was clear and unmovable. Kalos will try. His voice was rough and steady at the same time. In the name of the last monarch of Kalos, I present this as a formal diplomatic commitment to the Unova Kingdom. From this day forward, Kalos stands as an ally of Unova. We will explore together a future where humans and Pokémon coexist. The room erupted in astonished murmurs. On behalf of the Unova Kingdom, I welcome Kalos. Lucian extended his hand, his expression warm and certain. May we move forward together, and may this land find its way back to peace and prosperity. AZ looked at the outstretched hand. The exhaustion in his eyes receded, and in its place, something that had been absent for a very long time quietly returned. Hope. He reached out and took it. Their hands met, and in the ruins of Lumio City, something that felt like a new beginning settled over the hall without announcement. In a corner of the room, unnoticed by anyone else, a small Z-Guard cell watched the two figures with their hands clasped together. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated to a Medieval Pokémon World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.